Hey, welcome to the Database Management and Modularization course with JavaScript, the Build a Personal Instagram app course. So you're probably wondering, now that I've learned the basics of JavaScript, I know about variables, objects, functions, and all the necessary JavaScript stuff, where do I go from here? What do I need to know before I start building any serious application or using front-end frameworks? Or what do I need to know about this database stuff that back-end devs talk about? Well, I have a course for you, and this course is supposed to introduce you to everything you need to know before you start working with a framework. We'll build a natural application, and then we'll cover front-end database management. So database management is not restricted to back-end developers. As a front-end developer, I'll teach you database management, and trust me when I say it's going to be really easy. So take this course and support me by sharing the course, liking, subscribing to my channel, follow me on Skillshare, on GitHub. Just find a way to support me, you know, and yeah, I'll really like that. It's 3 hours of content with me. This is going to be amazing, and I mean it. All right, yeah. Hey, welcome to the course. We're starting this course with an existing project, and there's a step-by-step guide to building this phase in my YouTube channel. I've left the link to the tutorial in the description of this video, so check that out if you want to build this phase from scratch with me. Other than that, if you're good with HTML and CSS and the basics of JavaScript, then you're fine. Now, what we've covered that you might not know prior to this course is modularization. And by modularization, I mean creating separate JavaScript files for our HTML page sections. So what I mean is this: so you can see our code base right now. We have a folder called modules, and we have app.js file, index.css for our styling, and we have an index.html file. So when we click on this index.html file, you see that it's almost empty. What we have is the head tag and the meta tags. Then we have the body tag, and inside the body tag there's only one div which has an ID of root, and it's empty. But then on line 10 you can see a script type with a module, and then a link to our app.js file, to a link to the JavaScript file. Now when we click on the app.js file, look at what we have now: import bio from module/bio.js. so that's our first module. Then if we have import gallery from module/gallery.js, our second module, and we have import nav from module/nav.js, our third module. So we have these different modules. Now for the bio, we click on this bio file. You see that our bio contains an HTML code which we've wrapped in JavaScript string literals. So this is how we return our HTML code with the backticks. Now look at this: we have the section that contains the HTML code for bio, and we've exported bio as a module. So we can see on line 12, export default bio. Now bio is a function that returns the HTML code for bio, for the bio section. And we did the same thing for gallery.js. It's a function that returns the HTML code for the gallery section, and we export gallery as a module on line 28. And the same thing for nav.js. So this is a function that returns HTML code. That's what we mean by creating modules for our application. We're separating the different sections, different parts of our application into separate files and then exporting them. So when we export, we import on line 1, 2, 3, and then we call these functions in the app function. So we have an app function which on line 15 we're setting as the inner HTML property of the div we have in the index.html file. So remember on line 10 we have a script type module src equal to app.js. Back to the app.js file, this is what we are doing. We're getting that div with the ID of root, and then its inner HTML property is set to the app function. We are calling the app function as this inner HTML property. So when we call the app function, we're getting this from line 7 to line 11. The nav function is called, which returns the HTML code for nav. We wrap the bio and the gallery sections in a container div. So the bio function is called, which returns the code for the bio section, and the gallery section is called, which returns the code for the gallery section. So that's what we have so far. Let's see what our application looks like. Now here's our application. This is our personal Instagram, and then as you can see, first of all we have the nav section, Instagram, the search, and the icons. Right, remember to build this along with me, I've left a link to the tutorial in the description of this video. So we have the Instagram logo, the navigation, and then we have the bio section. We have the gallery section. We also have this photo input button, which when we click on it, we can select a photo to add to our Instagram application. We were talking about making all this work in the course. We'll talk about how to edit our bio section, edit the name, and then add a description. We'll talk about how to add images ourselves and store them in a database so that when we reload our page, we still have them. So right now, we're editing static images. These images you can see here. When we go back to our application and then to gallery.js, you see that these images are links. We want to get these images from our own computer. That's what we want to do in this course, and then store them in a database. We'll talk about what a database is in this course. So stay with me and let's have fun together. Oh, and by the way, I've also left a link to the current state of the application in the description. See you in the course. Hey, alright, before we get started, let's talk about data. Why are we even doing this? What is data? Data is information. That means this profile picture you're seeing right here is data. Jane Butters, the name, is data. The pictures in the gallery section are all data. So data can be images, they can be text, like we can see here, Jane Butters. They can be videos, different file formats. It's information. Whatever gives us information is data. Imagine this. We are finally done with this application and we take it like this, ship it, give it to our users. But there's a problem. All our users can have the name Jane Butters. So what if our user's name is Ebenezer Don? How can we give them this application and have their name here as Ebenezer Don instead of Jane Butters and their picture right here? So what's the first thing you do? Let's say you're given this problem. Hey, I needed to give this application to a user Ebenezer Don. Now the first thing that will come to your mind is going back to the code base, and then you go over to where we have Jane Butters in the bio section, and right here on line 7 you change this to Ebenezer Don. Now the problem with this is we're gonna have thousands of users, and would you want to be doing this for every single user? And what if, okay, my name changes tomorrow, I don't want to answer Ebenezer Don, I want to answer just Ebenezer. How do I change this? Should I call you to go back to your code base, change it, and then re-upload the application so that I can have just Ebenezer for myself? And then will you do the same thing for thousands of users, hundreds of thousands of users, millions of users? What if there was a way to enable me change this name Ebenezer Don to whatever I want right from this application? So that, remember, our users are not going to have any business with our code base. They don't know how to write code, so they're not going to they won't go to the code base to change it themselves. I want to be able to change it from here in my Instagram application. Now we can think of something else. Instead of having a follow button here, let's change this to an edit button, so that when the user clicks on the button, they'll be shown a box to type in a new name, and then when they click on submit or OK, it quickly reflects here in the application. So here's what I mean. Back to the bio.js, instead of having a follow button here on line 8, let's change this to an edit button. So edit bio, we'll change this to edit bio. We'll go back to our application, and this is our edit bio button. Let's add functionality to our edit bio button. We'll click on the edit bio button, and we want to see a modal for inputting a new name. Let's add an edit form in our bio section right here on line 10, form class, and we'll name this edit bio. Now inside this form we want to have an input field. finally a submit button. So this is our input field right now, the name and the submit. What we want to do is quickly make this work. So when I type in something else here, I want to go back to Jane Butters. I type in Jane Butters and then I click on submit. I want this to reflect right here. Do you think you can do that yourself? If you want to give it a go, feel free to pause this video and try it out and then resume playing when you're done. But if not, let's do it together right away. Now to do that, first of all, we want to get this form and then we'll add an event listener of submit so that whenever we type in the text here and click on the submit button, it changes this name on line 7. Let's try adding the event listener in this bio function. Now instead of returning this text directly, let's do that in a separate line. Remember we talked about this in part 1. We'll indent section. Now inside here we can write whatever JavaScript code we want to write. Let's start by getting the form. The next thing we want to get is the input field. So that also has an ID, so let's use the ID. It has an ID of name. Remember we decided not to close JavaScript lines with the semicolon, so let's remove that right here, and then we have an extra line on line 21. Remember, it's totally okay to decide to use it or not to use it, but for this particular course we chose not to use the semicolons. So we have the name input, and finally we want to get this name on line 11, this name paragraph on line 11. That's what we want to be changing. This is the name. Yeah, let's just leave it as name for now, and it's with the class of name. Remember, the difference is that this name input is an ID of name, but it's inside the form, and then this name right here. So we can try to name this use name output instead of just name. So you know that there's difference between the name input and the name output. So we'll be working with these 3. Now what we want to do is this: edit bio form dot add event listener submit, and whenever the form is submitted, we want to get the name input. So the name input, remember, document query selector hash name, but we won't stop there since this is a text field. Dot value, so the value will give us whatever text is inside that input box. So edit bio form dot add event listener submit, that's on line 6, and whenever this is submitted, we'll call the function. Now inside our function, what we want to do is change the name output dot inner text. We want to change that to the name input, so that's the new name that the user has put in the text box. Will this work now? Let's see. We have a blank screen, and when we click on inspect, look at our console. On call type error, can I read property value of null bio.js line 3. So this is our bio.js line 3 name input document query selector hash name dot value. So value of null means that document query selector hash name is null. This can't be found in the document. The element does not exist. And can you guess why that is happening? Now let's go back to our app.js file and see where we're calling the bio right here on line 11. Now we're calling the bio function, and it's supposed to return this inner HTML, this HTML code section class bio equal to this. But we're trying to use this now on line 3, name input document query selector hash name document query selector dot form. Before this is returned, we are trying to use these elements, so that's not going to work. We can only do this after this has been called. Now we can't do it after the return statement right here, because return terminates the function, remember. So we'll have to take this and then go back to our app.js file what we want to do is, after this app function has been called, after the bio has been rendered and we've added the different elements inside our document, inside our browser, we can now come over to line 19 and do this. Now we're going to try that again. So look at that, this renders. Now we have this cannot read property addEventListener of null after JS23. Edit bio form dot addEventListener submit. So addEventListener of null. This means that edit bio form does not exist. Let's see why it does not exist. Remember, document query selector dot form. Is that what our form is named? Look at this on line 11. Edit bio form and not dot form. Go back to the app.js file and we'll change this. Okay, one more time. Awesome, this works. Let's try out our code. Look at this now, Jane Butters, and then we'll click on submit. So what's the problem right now? Whenever we click on the submit button, the page reloads. So we want to stop that first of all and see what to do next. We'll go back to our edit bio.addEventListener function, and on line 24 I want to do this event.prevent default. So this prevents the default page reload on submit. Event.prevent default. Now back to our application, Jane Butters, and submit. Look at that, we have another problem. Let's inspect and see if there's anything from our console. Nothing from our console. Now let's debug this. Event.prevent default. The next thing we want to do is log name input to the console, just to be sure we have a name input right. So we'll be sure we have name input right, and then we'll be sure we have name output right. Okay, so look at this, name input is empty. When we go back to our code and look at this, we're getting name input, line 20, document query selector dot value. So this is name input. Now initially the name input is empty before the submit button is clicked. Once the page is refreshed, like when the page is brand new, the name input is empty, and that's what our variable is getting. So even if we type something else later on, it's still going to get that the empty name input has already been stored in this variable. So what we can do is take this name input and name output. We can do that with just the name input. We'll take this name input and then we'll put it inside the addEventListener function. So whenever the submit button is clicked, it will get the name input at that instance, at that point, and then use that for whatever we want. But we don't want to do this before the submit button is clicked. We want to do this whenever the submit button is clicked. So let's just take the name input and the name output and we'll put it right inside the addEventListener function. Okay, let's try this again. Jane Butters and submit. Amazing. Look at that, Jane Butters. So this is working very well. This is working fine. Jane Doe. Click on submit and we have Jane Doe. We can decide to change it to something else. Angelina Jones, and we click on submit and we have Angelina Jones. One little problem though, and that's that whenever we reload our page, it's back to Ebenezer Dunn, but this is not Ebenezer Dunn, this is Jane Butters. So this is why we need a database. How do I ensure that when the user changes this name and then they reload the page, they'll still have that particular name they've changed? So no matter how many times they reload the page, Jane Butters is still going to be there, so that they don't need to go back to our code and then change this, go back to bio.js and change this to Jane Butters just because they want it to be Jane Butters. Remember, our users don't have access to our code base. They don't know what this or what all this is all about. So that, look at this, this is Jane Butters, and when we reload, it's Jane Butters, we reload, it's Jane Butters, and it's always Jane Butters without needing to come back to the code to change it. So how do we do this? So what is a database? It's simply where data is stored. Here's an example. It could be if you've heard of Excel before or spreadsheet, right? Data is stored right there. Now look at this. This is an Excel spreadsheet of Olympic athletes data. We have the athlete name Michael Phelps, age 23, country United States, year 2008, closing ceremony date 24/08/2008. Sports swimming. We have this information for another Michael Phelps, Natalie, Alexi, Alessia, Missy Franklin. So data is stored here. I need to find information about Alison Smith. I come over to this database and I can see Alison Smith on the row 10 and look at the information. Alison Smith is 23 years old, United States, 2012, and 12/08/2012, swimming. So this is an example of a database. I have this right here where my data is stored and I can access the data from here whenever I want. So imagine we had something like this for our Instagram application. Now whenever we change this name right here, Jane Borders, we change this to Angelina Jones, and then we click on submit. This is stored in our database. So instead of Alison Smith, it becomes Angelina Jones, age, country, and all the rest. So that when we reload our page, our application can go back to the database where we stored the information and get that data we stored there. So we change it to Angelina Jones, and then whenever application opens up, reloads, instead of getting the data from our hard coded code base, from a static code base, the data we inputted when writing our code, instead of getting the data from there, it'll get the data from a database like this. So it'll come over to the database, get the data, and put it there. Now that means that if we go back to our code, instead of having Jane Borders here, we want to have something like name from database, so that whenever application sees this, it knows to go to our database and get the name. So whatever name is in our database is what's going to reflect there. So that's an example of a database. But you can create a database right now, and that's easy. So this is not going to be like this. Let's change this back. So it's actually easy to create a database yourself. So you can come over to sheets.google.com and start a new spreadsheet. This is, click on the blank, and then inside the spreadsheet you can create your database. Remember, it's not a big deal. You just have to store data here. It can be something like this. We have for Jane Borders, and then we have her email address. We can decide to have age for Jane Borders. Let's say Jane Borders is 39 years old, right? And we can decide to label this however this is done. We'll use the first row for the labeling. On row 2, we want to have the name, email address, and age values. So this should be name, email, and age. This is a database. We can decide to store so many names here. Store Ebenezer Don, his email address, age. Store Angelina Jones, email address, age. Store Kevin Hart's email address, age, and all that. And that's a database. You just created a database. You're a database creator if you've done this. Remember, just come over to sheets.google.com and create your first database, and that'll be amazing. Now that we have that cleared up, how do we work with database in the browser? We won't be using spreadsheet for a browser database, because the browser has its own database, which is called IndexedDB. You've probably heard of local storage before. That's another example of storage, database, storing data in the browser. But there's an even better option, which we're going to be exploring in this course, and that's the IndexedDB. So that we'll be able to store the name that we have here, Jane Borders. We can decide to add a bio for Jane Borders. Let's quickly do that. We can come over to a bio.js file and write under the Jane Butters paragraph, we can add a new paragraph equal to, let's name this about. So I want to add an about section for Jane Butters. What do we have here? Hi, I'm Jane. I used to be indecisive, but now I'm not so sure. that sounds really nice. I did not come up with this myself. So that's for that. Look at our application. Jane Butters, this is a bio. Hi, I'm Jane. I used to be indecisive, but now I'm not so sure. And then edit bio should be able to change the name and the about section for Jane Butters. We take the name, we take about Jane Butters, and we store that in our browser's database, so that whenever we load a page, whenever we load our application is going to get those details, the name, the bio section, right, the about. Our application is going to get that from our browser's database, IndexedDb. But before we explore IndexedDB, let's quickly restructure our application. What we want to do is separate these different modules, bio, gallery, nav. We want to separate them and move them into different into their own directories. This is so that we'll be able to have separate styling, separate style files for them. When we come to our style.css file right now, you can see that it's already getting too much, and we'll be doing a lot more styling later on. So we don't want this to be too, or we don't want to have too much styling in one file. What we want to do is have the style for bio, the bio section. So we want to have the bio.css file. We want to have gallery.css file for the gallery section. We want to have nav.css file for the nav section. So let's group everything inside their separate directories. Instead of having just bio.js in the module section, let's have a bio directory, and then we'll move this bio.js inside there. So are you sure you want to move bio.js into bio? Move. Now my VS Code is configured to automatically edit the import location whenever the location of the file is changed. So what that means is when we come to app.js, you see that on line 1 this is automatically changed to module/bio. That's the bio directory /bio.js. Let's do the same thing for gallery. So inside the modules folder, we'll create a new folder and we'll name that gallery. So everything that concerns gallery is going to be here, not just the CSS file. I want to have some other things that concern gallery inside this folder later on, and you see that as we progress in the course. So move that, and then this updates in the app.js file. And finally, we'll do the same thing for the nav.js file. So new folder, we have nav, and then we'll move the nav.js file inside the nav folder. The next thing we're going to be doing, let's quickly create the bio.css file, gallery.css file, and nav.css files. Inside the bio directory, we have bio.css. Inside the gallery directory, we have gallery.css. So we'll be using these files later on. And inside the nav directory, we have nav.css. So you see the same way we imported these different modules, bio, gallery, nav. We imported these different modules, JavaScript modules. We can also do the same thing for CSS. That means that later on we'll be importing bio.css, gallery.css, and the nav.css file into one style.css file, so that when we go back to our index.html file, we'll need to import one CSS file, but that one CSS file will have all the different CSS files. Do you get that? Okay, we'll do it together as we progress. Now we can explore IndexedDB. So look at our application. What do you know about the browser? We know that we can right click and then inspect. We'll see the different developer options. We can come over to this button where the cursor is hovered on. We click on that button. I don't know what the icon is called, and then we click on application, and inside application we can see different things: manifest service workers, clear storage. But what we're interested in right now is IndexedDB. If you've heard of local storage before, this is what local storage looks like. So similar to what we did with spreadsheets, where we were able to store data. Look at the local storage key value. So like what we did in spreadsheet, where we had a name, email address, age, and all that, we can try to do the same thing here. So we have name, and then value is going to be Jane Butters. email, and then we have Jane Bottas, age. So Jane Bottas is 39 years old. Okay, we can decide to have these different things, and then to get these values in our file, what we need to do is come over to the bio.js file, and instead of Jane Bottas, we can do this. So to get from our local storage dot get item, and remember we stored this item as name. So the get item, want to get name, and when we put name inside this get item method, we should be getting the value Jane Bottas. Just think of it like JavaScript objects. Objects have key value pairs. So in JavaScript, now get item, and inside this get item method, want to have name. So this is going to be the name, and instead of having Jane Bottas right here on line 9, remember what we talked about, we're going to have something like this. So you remember this is we're using the JavaScript string literals. That means we can write JavaScript inside this string using the template literals, this curly bracket and the $sign. So inside this curly bracket and $sign, we have a name. Now let's go back to our browser and see what this looks like. So look at that, name Jane Bottas, but what we wrote here is name, local storage will get item name. That means that if we decide to change this to something else, remember the next name we are using Angelina Jones, and then we reload our page, see that we have Angelina Jones because it's taking from this database, it's taking from the local storage, and then it's putting it inside, it's using that for the name in the browser. So we don't have a static name, we have local storage. But then we won't be covering much on local storage. We won't cover how to store items in local storage because our focus right now is IndexedDB, and I'll talk about the advantages of IndexedDB. Now the problem with local storage is that it has limits. It has a limit in storage, it has a limit to the type of file it can store. We can only store string files in local storage. It can store objects or arrays, and then it has a limit to the file size, to the maximum storage size, which is capped at 10 MB. So that means that when we want to store files right now for text, this is not going to mean much. But when we start storing images and other types of data, we'll need more than 10 MB. But for IndexedDB, we can store different file types. We can store text, we can store objects, we can store arrays, and the size is relative to the user storage space. So it's not capped at any maximum size. It's relative to how much storage you have in your computer. Another reason we're learning IndexedDB is because it's a great introduction to databases. When you hear of backend databases like PostgreSQL, you've heard of PostgreSQL before, it's another database. For the backend, you mostly hear together with backends. It's not located in the browser. You hear of databases like SQLite, MongoDB. So IndexedDB is similar to these databases, especially MongoDB. It's very great introduction to this different database. So we'll learn how to use IndexedDB, store different file types, store images. The images in the gallery, won't store that to IndexedDB so that we have different images, we can delete the images and so on. Let's see how we can create a database with IndexedDB. By the way, I've left a link to the current state of the code base in the description, so feel free to check it out and use that to follow along. Right now, when we convert to the IndexedDB, we'll click on the IndexedDB button, we see that it's empty. That's because there's no database currently inside here. So we've not created any database yet. To create an IndexedDB database, we'll come over to our app.js file and we'll use the IndexedDB.open method. So you have IndexedDB.open, and this is going to create a database with whatever we write inside here. That's going to be the name of the database. So let's name our database Instagram. Now, whenever our application opens up, this runs line 7. Let's go back to our browser and see if this works. So look at this. We click on IndexedDB and you can see that it now has a drop down button. Click on the drop down and look at this. So we have our database Instagram right here. Now when we hover on Instagram, look at where we have version 1, and inside it there's a text beside it that says empty. When you create a database, it creates it in versions. So we have the database here, Instagram on line 7, and then the default version, since this is a new database, the default version is creating for us is 1. Version is the state of something at a time. So the state of our database version 1, we can decide to have version 2. Let's say we decide to restructure our database, have different names in our database, not necessarily a different structure. Instead of having name, email address, age, we want to have name, location, and something else. You know, we can say, okay, this is version 2, this is not version 1, just so we don't break application with this new huge change. So we can decide to put that in the new version 2, and version 2 have a different database structure. Version 3 has a different database structure. So to specify the database we're creating or opening, now IndexedDb.open opens a database. So it either creates a new database if that particular database, Instagram, right, that we've put inside this bracket, if it does not exist, it creates a new database called Instagram or whatever text you put there. And if a database with that name already exists, what it does is open that database. So to specify the version of database we want to create or open, or we'll add a comma here inside the method arguments and 1. So this is going to tell IndexedDb to open Instagram version 1. Now we can do this for version 2. So Instagram, and then we have 2 here. So let's go back to our browser and check what we have. So look at this now. We have Instagram. The city version has changed to 2. So let's delete this database and create it again with version 1. So to delete the database, we'll click on this delete button. Please confirm delete of Instagram database. Okay. Now we can also delete this database here since we don't need it. And then we can recreate this database. So instead of having 2 here, we can have 1. We'll go back to a browser and see that Instagram has been created with a version 1. Now what if we have a problem with creating a database or opening a database? Let's say instead of version 1 we write 0 here and there's an error. How do we detect that error, and what do we do when that happens? You know, can we foresee these things and plan them out before they happen? So want to know if this is successful, if IndexedDb.open, want to know if it's successful, and then what to do when it's successful. I want to know if it fails, and then what to do if it fails. So I want to be able to write that out in code and tell our browser what to do in these different scenarios. So look at this now. This is showing a blank page. And when we go to our console, we can see an error message: failed to execute open on IDB factory. The version provided must not be 0. In order to know when this is successful or when it fails, this method has a property called onSuccess and onError. And to be able to access that, let's assign this IndexedDb.open Instagram. Let's assign it to a variable. So we'll change this back to 1, and then we'll assign IndexedDb.open to a variable. Let's call this variable request. So const request equal to IndexedDb.open. Now we have request equal to IndexedDb.open. We can convert to line 8 and then do this: request.onSuccess equal to, we want to create a function. So this function is going to be run when the request has been successful, if it's successfully opened or successfully created. So request.onSuccess is equal to a function. Let's do this first of all: log success. Let's see if that works. So we'll come over to our console. Look at this now: success creation or accessing DB. Let's do the same thing for error. So we have request.onError. This is equal to a function. Then we'll log this to the console, and we want to have error creating accessing DB. Now we have a lot going on in our app.js file. We have we're importing the different modules, we're creating the database, running this application, adding event listeners. Oh, let's separate everything. We want to clear up our app.js file and put all these different functionalities in different files. So we'll start with the database, and then later on we'll move these events over to different files. So for the database, we want to have this line 5 to line 15, no, line 5 to line 7 in a database.js file. So let's create a database.js file in our root directory. So I'm going to close the modules directory. We'll create a new file, database, name it database.js. Now inside our database.js, let's paste what we did before. So we have request equal to IndexedDb.open Instagram. So let's see if this still works. Remember, when we open our application, we want to see success creating or accessing DB. Look at this, that's not running. Now this is a separate file. Our application does not know about this file, because what we did was inside our index.html file, we're adding app.js as a script file. But database.js, even if we add 10,000 other files, our application only sees app.js. So let's export this request variable and import it inside app.js so that it runs whenever app.js is called from the index.html file. So like what we did in the different in the other modules, export default, or instead of default, there's another way to export. Let's say we want to export more than one variable or function. We can do export and then curly brace and name the different variables. So we'll be exporting different variables, functions from this particular database.js file later on. So instead of doing export default, let's have export request. Now just that, and we can convert to our app.js file and import on line 4, import request from /database.js. We're gonna have a problem. Let's see what that problem is. Look at this. The requested module /database.js does not provide an export named default. So we can only import like this. Say we did import bio, this does not return an error. But when we do import request from database.js, we have an error message, and that's because the way we exported bio is different from the way we exported request. So look at where we exported bio, export default bio, and then we can import it that way, import bio. But when we exported request, we have it inside the curly brace. So that means when we're importing request, we'll import it inside that same curly brace. So if we need to import something else later on, we just add the comma and then whatever variable we're importing. So let's say we export other things from database.js file, we can import it this way. So that's for that. Let's see now. Look at that, success creating or accessing DB. Let's talk about object stores. Let's go back to our browser and let's see what we have in our local storage. So look at this, where we have age 39, name Angelina Jones, email jane.butters@email.com. The problem here is that everything inside here, right, this local storage, everything inside here is supposed to be for just bio, and then we won't have something else for gallery. Like gallery, we want to have the picture, the description for the picture, tag for picture, and so on, the image and whatever. And let's say we want to have a different section altogether, a different group of data for friends, right? You want to know all the followers or friends, different group of data for different things. A group of data, like we want to separate them into different groups for bio, for gallery, for followers, friends, and all the different groupings. We can't do that in local storage because there's no way to group this data. I want to store for image, we'll have to come over here and write image and then the image URL. So it's like everything belongs to one place, but they're supposed to be grouped differently. So that's what object stores help us to do in IndexedDb. So right now we have our Instagram database. What we can do is create different object stores to store different groups of data, buckets of data. So we have an object store for bio, and everything we are going to be storing inside bio is all the things that are related to bio. And then we'll have another object store for gallery and whatever other grouping we want to do. We have different object stores for these data. let's see how we can create an object store. Before we create an object store, we want to get the database. Let's see what is inside the request variable. So console.log, let's log something else to the console, and then let's log the request variable. Go over to the console and look at the request variable, see what's inside. Remember, this is how this variable we created, where we created a database, right? It does not return the database itself. It returns this object that has the error block. So this is the on-error function that we created, and this is the on-success function. Yeah, now it has on upgrade needed, ready state, and then it has result. So results, look at this now, IDB database. It contains an IDB database, name of the database, Instagram version 1. So this is where we have our database. That request we made dot result. So the result property in that request is the database. Remember, that request has other properties on error, on success, ready state, on upgrade needed. We'll be talking about that in a bit. So to get the database, we won't just say request, we'll have to do request dot result. Now back here on line 3, let's have a database. So const database equal to request dot result. Now let's try again. We'll consider log database instead of request this time. Now look at our database. See that name, Instagram, object store, names. So we want to create a different object stores for this database. And to create an object store, what we'll do is database, right? The database we created dot create object store, and inside this we'll have the name of the object store. So we want to create an object store for bio, and then inside this object store we'll have the different data. Like we'll have name, we'll have about, we'll have age, email address, and so on. Now let's see if this works. Look at this. Fail to execute create object store on IDB database. The database is not running a version change transaction. In order to create an object store, we'll have to take this function and put it in, look at this, the on upgrade needed. So let's log the request again. Now inside our request, see that we have this on upgrade needed method, just property, just like the on error and on success method. It has an on upgrade needed property, and this is supposed to be called whenever we want to do a version change, version 1 to version 2. You know, we are trying to open a version higher than the previous version. This is called. So what we want to do is create the database, the object stores inside this on upgrade needed property. Now here's what I mean. So for now, this is the only thing we'll be using the on upgrade needed property to do, to create our different object stores. So on upgrade, request on upgrade needed, this returns a function, and then inside this function, const database, remember, is equal to request dot results. Then let's take line 7 and then put it inside this on upgrade needed method. Let's try again. So look at this. Our app does not return an error anymore. So let's see if our object store has been created. We'll come over to application and look at our Instagram application. There's no object store here. This is still empty. Now remember that I mentioned that the on upgrade needed method only runs when there's a need for upgrade. So that means that this will only be triggered when we just create the database. Let's say this is a new database. When the database is newly created, then this will be triggered, or when the version of this database changes. So instead of 1, we add 2, right? We're upgrading it from 1 to a higher version, 2 or to 3 or to 4. Then the method for the on upgrade needed property is going to be triggered. So no matter how many times we reload our page right now, this is not going to be triggered because our database Instagram has already been created. It already exists, and then the version remains the same. So for this, we're going to upgrade to version 2 since we're changing the structure. Remember, we're changing the structure of our database. We're adding the new object store bio. So let's upgrade to version 2. And when we upgrade to version 2, we want to just be sure that something logs. Right now, if we log hey to the console and then we reload our page, right, it's not being called because this function, there's nothing triggering it right now. So let's change this to version 2 and then we'll go back to our browser and see what we have. Okay, now this is our IndexedDB and we open the Instagram, see that there's now an icon by the side, and awesome, we have a bio object store created. So look at that, we have bio and then key value. So right now bio object store is empty. Let's quickly do the same thing for gallery. If you think you can do that by yourself, quickly pause this video and then give it a go. If not, stay with me. Now back to our code, we are going to do the same thing for gallery. So right on line 12, we'll enter and then database.create object store. And inside this method, we have gallery. Okay, now you remember nothing is triggering this right now. So even if we go back to our browser and refresh, we can't see the gallery object store unless we upgrade the database from version 2 to 3, 4, 5, 6 or higher. Alright, so let's upgrade to version 3. And when we reload, we should see our gallery right now. Right? Okay, so we can't see our gallery right now. Let's see what the problem is. So we'll go back to our console and look at this. Hey is being triggered, right, because of we've upgraded to version 3. So this hey line 10 is run, hey is being triggered. But then we get to where exactly, let's say we get to line 11, yeah, that should run fine. So the problem should be from line 12 or 13. Now look at the error message. Fail to execute create object store on IDB database. An object store with the specified name already exists. Now what object store is that? Back to our IndexedDB database, look at bio already exists. Now what we are doing when we trigger this method, we are running everything all over again. So it's going to run consider log database because it requires the return. It's not going to filter out this line 12 database or create object store bio. Maybe it's going to see that bio has already been created, right? Let's just move on to the next one. It's going to try to create bio all over again. So that's why we have this error. You're trying to create bio, but then bio already exists. So what we are going to do is instead remove line 12 so that we can successfully create our gallery. So if we remove line 12, we'll still have bio in IndexedDB. Remember, we're not removing the bio object store in the IndexedDB database. We're just removing this line so that our gallery create object store method can be run. Now we remove line 12 and let's try again. So look at that. Hey is being triggered with no error, and then application. Awesome. So look at our gallery is right here. So now we have a bio and gallery object stores. This is awesome. Another way to do that, instead of removing the line 12, the bio line, we remove the bio create object store method, right? If this application is brand new and we've not added any data to it yet, we've not done much structuring, we can delete the database and then run again without having to touch our code. Now if we delete the database, then we can come over to our code and we can even start from version 2. And let's quickly add create object store gallery and version 2. Go back to our code and nice, we have bio and gallery, we have our object stores again. So that's how we do it. Now you can even go ahead and remove this create object store method and you still have the different object stores in your application. But we don't want to do that because when we move our application to another computer, we want this database or create object store methods to be run. So that's for that. We've seen how we can create object stores. Now let's see how to use them. Hey, alright, let's start by using the bio object store. We'll see how we can add data to the bio, data which includes the name of the user and the user description. Hi, I'm Jane. I used to be in the CC, but now I'm not so sure. Now, first of all, we'll remove the console.log statement on line 10. And then, since we already have the bio object store created, we can decide to access the database. Remember, the database, to access the database, const database is equal to request.results. So this request we created on line 1, request IndexedDb.open. So request.result will give us the database. Now, once we have the database, we can create a transaction. So we can create a transaction, and we'll do that using the database.transaction method. Now transaction is like this is a transaction, normal English transaction, buy or sell. So it's something as give and receive. Now transaction, I want to write data to the database, I want to add data to the database, or I want to receive data from the database. I want to get data from the database, or I want to give data to the database. So the give and receive, buy and sell, that's what transaction means. So what store are we getting data from? We want to add data to the bio store, so we'll put that in this square brackets, and then let's start by adding data. There's no data in the bio store currently, so let's add data. In order to tell this transaction that we want to be able to add data to it, right? By default, this has created, with just this, we've created a bio transaction, but we can only use this transaction to get data right now. What if we want to add data through this transaction? We'll have to add another argument in strings, read, write. So this means that we can read data and we can also write data to the database. So write data, the same thing we did when we added data to the local storage. We wrote data to the local storage. So write data means adding data. Write data, add data. Now that we have our transaction, the next thing we want to do is create a store. So we have the transaction. I want to access our bio store. We have the bio transaction, so we want to access the bio store. So we'll do name this store, and then this transaction we've created dot object store, and inside this bio. So now we have our store, this bio store. We can now add or read data through this particular store. So write is not restricted to add only. Write also includes edit and remove. So what if we've already added data to it and want to edit that data? That's part of write. And then what if we want to remove the data we've added? That's also part of write. Read includes getting the data, seeing the data we've added. So read, get the data. Write, add, update, delete. So when you have CRUD, create, read, update, delete. So create, write, reads, gets, update, delete, writes. Now that we have our store, the last thing we'll be doing is store.add. So we're writing data to this database, and inside this our store.add function, what do we want to add? We want to send an object, right? And look at that application. Okay, there's a problem right now. Let's what we have in the console. Failed to read the result provided from ID request. The request has not finished. Okay, now this IndexedDb.open method is asynchronous. That means that normally when JavaScript runs, it runs synchronously. It means it runs line by line, so one line at a time. It first of all completes this line before it goes on to the next line and the next line and the next line. So every line has to be completed before it goes on to the next and the next and the next. So that's synchronous. But the problem with that is when you're making a request to, let's say, an external database that you're trying to access, and it's taking time. So because of maybe network is probably slow, lagging, or just a request to something else, takes time, maybe 2 seconds, 3 seconds. It means that every other thing in your application will have to stop until that particular request is complete. So that's the need for asynchronous calls. When is asynchronous? It's going to start running, it's going to initiate the process, but then while it's still making the request, the next line can run, the next line can run, and the next line can run. And when the request has been done, then you can use whatever result you get from it. So asynchronous means it can run while others are running. Synchronous means only one has to be run at a time. So that's the difference. Now this IndexedDb.open method is asynchronous, so that while this is still being open, these other lines are being run. JavaScript is seeing these other lines like database equal to request the result. So remember, we are opening this database with IndexedDb.open method, but while it's still being opened, we are trying to access results from a request. That's why we have this error. Fail to read the result provided from IndexedDb. The request has not finished. So we are trying to get result from request when request has not finished running. So what we are going to do is take this code, and we'll put it inside the onSuccess method. So this onSuccess method only gets called when the request has been completed. So request.onSuccess, when a request has been completed successfully, then do this. Database equals to request the result. So we already have database on line 4. Let's remove this. Const transaction equal to database.transaction bio read write. So we're opening the transaction, we are creating the store, and then finally what we want to do is remove this comment from here. And now what are we adding? Remember, we'll add the name and the description. So name right here, and what's the name we want to use right now? Right now it's Angelina Jones, so let's change it back to Jane Bottas. And Jane Bottas description, so we have a comma here, and description. So this is a JavaScript object. Hey, I'm Jane. We'll need to escape this. I think that should be it, or rather let's use the backtick. Okay, so this should work. Now when we go over to our application, we want to see that this has been added to the store. Okay, now we have another problem. Uncaught DOM exception, failed to execute add on IDB object store. The object store uses out of line keys and has no key generator, and the key parameter was not provided at IDB OpenDB request.onSuccess. Now to fix this error, we have to take note of this part. The object store uses out of line keys and has no key generator. So we want to give it a key generator. Remember, key value pairs in our IndexedDB database, but there's no key generator right now. So we're trying to add to an object store that does not have key. We're trying to add value without key. So how do we add keys, make generate keys automatically? So this right here, now the object has key value pairs, but then remember, this is a value. So this object that has key value pairs is one value object. So you can forget about the key value pairs inside this object and see the object as one value. Now this object with one value needs a key to be assigned to in the database. So we have to have a key there, and then we have these objects. So what we are going to do is come over to line 15 and 16 where we created the object stores, and inside the create object store method we'll add a comma, and then let's add another argument, auto increment true. Now this is going to auto generate keys for our IndexedDB database. So for the bio object store, whenever we add data to the bio object store, the key is going to be auto generated. So we have like one, the first key 1, and then value is going to be name, Jane Bottas, description. We can have 2, value 3, value 4. So it's auto incrementing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. As long as we're creating, it's auto incrementing. Let's do the same thing for gallery. On line 16 we have the same thing for gallery. Now let's see what we have. Look at this, uncaught syntax error, missing closing parentheses after argument list. Now whenever you see this error, take note of this where the cursor is hovering on right now, by the right, database GS16. So this is indicating where exactly this error is coming from. So the database.js file line 16, that's what it means. So don't be scared of reading the error messages, and don't be scared of checking out the lines. So we can now come over to database.js and go back to line 16. So look at this now, gallery, and then there's no comma. Okay, look at this error. The object store uses out of line keys and has no key generator, so it's still returning this thing. Remember, this request.onUpgrade needed function only runs whenever there's an upgrade in the database or it's a new database. So if the database changes to something else, let's say photogram, instead of Instagram, or this version increases, so instead of version 2 it becomes version 3. So right now what we've done here has no effect, because this method has not been called. So in order to trigger this change, since we've changed the structure of our database, we'll have to make this version 3. Now let's try again. Okay, an object store with a specified name already exists. Remember what we went through before. So it's trying to create data bio object store and gallery object store. So let's comment this out for now and try again. We have the same error. We're just going back and forth. Look at this. Now we're trying to access this again. Remember, we just commented out this. That means that the auto increment true that we added has still not been run. So what do we do to fix it? A way to fix this will be to delete this object store, delete the object stores, and then recreate them with the auto increment option. So first of all, delete the object stores right inside the onUpgrade needed method before we create the object stores again with the new auto increment option. So to delete an object store, what we'll do is the same thing, similar to what we've done before. Database hello.create object store .delete object store, and then inside this method we have bio. Let's do the same thing for gallery. Database.delete object store gallery, and then to trigger this method, let's make this version 4. So this is version 4 right now. Let's see what we have in our browser. All right, looks like there's no error. And then when we go back to application, we can see our key value pairs. Since we have the auto increment option now, you see that keys are created with values. So the value right now is this object name Jane Butters, description hey I'm Jane, and then the key is from the auto increment option we added. So that means that when we add the next object, right, the next value, the key is going to auto increment to 2, and then to 3, and then 4, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. So that's what the auto increment option for. It generates keys automatically and then increments automatically. So let's try that again. We will reload this page, and then we should see another key value pair created, because as long as this is always there, requested on success, as long as this transaction is in requested on success, whenever the database is opened, we're going to have a new key value pair created. So the next key value pair should have a key of 1 and the same value of name Jane Butters and description hey I'm Jane. So let's reload. Okay, we have to refresh the database to see a change. Awesome. So look at this, key 1, the second one key 2. So that's what we have. Reload again, we'll see 3, 4, 3, and the value name Jane Butters, description hey I'm Jane. Now we can remove our database.delete object stores on line 15 and 16. Okay, so far we've seen how to create object stores in a database, and we've seen how to add data to those object stores, but we don't want to be doing this every single time we want to create object stores. Const transaction, database of transaction, bio read write, const store, transactional object store, store.add, and then we'll have to put the values inside there, and we'll put everything inside the onSuccess property. You know, it's just too much work. What we want to do is create a function named addEntryToDb, and then that function will have all this transaction store and store.add inside of it, so that whenever we want to add data to a particular store, data to the database, we'll just call that function, and then inside the function arguments we'll put in the data we want to add. So what we're going to do is come over to line 23, and then we'll create a new function, name it addEntryToDb, and this should take 2 parameters, store name. So store name, that's the object store, in this case is bio, what we did previously. So store name, and then entry. So entry is the data entry. This is an example of the entry. This object name Jane Butters, description hey I'm Jane. This one on line 10. So store name and entry. So those are the parameters our function will take. And then inside a function, we want to do this. So let's take this out of here, and then we'll put it on line 20. So look at what we have now. Const transaction equal to database.transaction. But remember, database is not defined. Database is inside the scope of onSuccess, on upgrade needed, and yeah. So we have to add database. Remember, database is equal to request.result. All right, so we have a database transaction store.add name. Now we want to use the store name and the entry. That means that instead of having a bio here, right, we'll have the store name. So when a user calls this function and puts store name as its first argument, that's what's going to that's what our database or transaction method is going to use. And then read write stays the same. The next thing we want to do is change this bio again to store name. Finally, we want to change this. So this is the entry, the data we're putting inside the object store, the database. So we'll remove this, and instead of what we had there, instead of this, let's have entry. All right, so const database equal to request.result, const transaction equal to database.transaction, store name read write, store transaction object store name store.add entry. So this is our function for adding entry to the DB. So what we call this function is going to be something like this: add entry to DB, and then store name, bio, comma, and entry, the object. So look at this. Now, even if we want to add 10,000 entries to 10,000 different object stores, let's say we want to add for gallery, all we have to do is gallery right here, and then inside here the data we're adding to gallery. So now that we have a function, we can add, you know, so many objects, so many data in our database without needing to do all this again. All right, let's see how we can use our addEntryToDb method in our application. Now, to use our addEntryToDb method outside this database.js file, we're going to export it the same way we exported request. So addEntryToDb, now we've exported it, we can import it, let's say inside app.js file, just so we can test the function and make sure everything is working correctly. So where we have request, we want to have addEntryToDb. Now we want to call this function the same way we called it before in the database.js file, but the difference now is that we'll have to use the request.onSuccess method in the app.js file. We've imported request on line 4. So what we're going to do next is come over to line 20, right below the rootdiv.innerHTML equal to app method, and then we'll call request.onSuccess. So remember, we are doing this because we want to only run the function when the database has been successfully created or opened. So request.onSuccess, addEntryToDb, and inside this let's have, first of all, the object store, the store name bio, and then the entry. Okay, let's save this and try it out. Yeah, look at this, all the reloads we've been doing ever since I've been creating new, every refresh we've made had been created new key value pairs. So that's why we have all these. See where we had undefined 12, 13, 14, 15, that was when there was no we hadn't added an entry yet as the second argument. So that's for that. Our addEntryToDb function works just well. Now back to our database file where we created our addEntryToDb function. Transaction has a property named onComplete, and this property is supposed to tell transaction what to do, tell the application what to do whenever a particular transaction has been completed. So for example, we're adding an entry to the DB. After we've successfully added the entry to the DB, what do I do next? How do I let you know that I've added this entry to the DB? So here's what I mean. Right on line 25, let's have transaction.onComplete.
So it's the same way we did the request.onSuccess. We're doing the same thing for onComplete, and then it's going to run a method. This is a function, and let's make it run alert. So alert entry added to, okay, we want to add this entry to store name, right? Entry added to store name, the template literals, and then the variable store name. So let's try this out. Okay, all right, look at that, entry added to bio. When we reload, we expect to see entry added to bio. So whenever you know, an entry has been added to the bio, whenever a transaction is complete, whatever we assign to this transaction or complete property is going to run. There's also a transaction.onError property. So when a transaction fails, you know, transaction.onError, when a transaction fails, this is what's going to happen. So a function, and inside this function, we want to log to the console. What if we want to know the particular error? Like, what's the error specifically? What's the specific error, you know, when you're trying to add the entry to the DB? So for that, we'll have to add an event parameter in the function so that we can get the error with event.target.error. So this should return whatever error, whatever specific error occurred when we were trying to add an entry to the database. So let's log this to the console. All right, so we have this right now. What if we want to get an entry from the DB? It's going to be similar to what we did for addEntryToDb. Let's create a function and we'll name it getEntry from DB. So this function takes in, you know, two parameters, store name and ID. I'll tell you what ID is for later on. Now, store name and ID. Store name, very important. Now what we want to do, transaction, go to database dot transaction, and inside this transaction method, store name. Now, unlike what we did in the addEntryToDb function where we added read writes, we're not planning to write anything to the database because all we're doing right now is getting from the database. So there's no need to add the read write argument. Let's create a store transaction dot object store. Store name. Then let's make the requests. So this is what the request looks like. Const request equal to store.getAll. Now when we call this store.getAll method, we are going to get all the entries inside the object store name. So if it's bio, for example, we're going to get all the entries inside the object store bio. That's getAll. But now store also has a get method, so something like this, store.get, and this is where we'll be needing ID. So demo that after we see how getAll works. Store.getID, this is going to get a specific value from the bio object store instead of all the values. So instead of all the entries there, store.get is going to get a specific entry. So the entry that has a particular ID we put inside here, store.get is going to get that entry. So let's see how store.getAll works. We also have the request.onSuccess and onError. So this is the same thing as what we did with transaction. Request.onSuccess. So if this is successful, we should run this method. Let's log something to the console. Success and request. This is the request. Now to get the result of our store.getAll method, we do this request.result. So it also has an onError property. Request.onError. They should run a function, And then let's log something to the console. Error getting data from store. Okay, let's export, and then we'll use it in our app.js file. So request on success, add entry to DB. Let's get entry from DB. So we want to get all the entries in the bio object store. Let's see our application. Database is not defined. Back to our database.js file. We have database transaction here, so we have to define database. Okay. Cannot access request before initialization. So look at this, database.js line 33. So pause this video and see if we can figure out what the problem is. Okay, now here's the problem. Cannot, look at the error message, cannot access request before initialization. This is different from what we got before, where it was cannot access request something like when it has not been completed. So this means that initialization is trying to get the request from line 36. So const request equal to store.get all is trying to get this request instead of this request. So this means I will have to change the name for this function. So instead of request, let's have it as get data. So get data equal to store.get all, and then get data.onSuccess do this, get data.onError do this. Let's try again. All right, look at that, success, and we have our data. So look at this, is returning object store name. So this is returning the database request.result. Remember, we're going to change this to get data. So get data.result. Awesome. Look at all our entries, 38 entries in total. That's awesome. So hey, I'm Jane Bottas, and all that. So this is how you can get entry from DB. Now what if you want to get a specific entry? When we come over to application, look at this, we have the keys and the value. So right now the key is the same as the ID, and where you can see this pound sign, this column right here is for index. So the ID for this particular entry, Jane Bottas description hey I, is 19. So let's see how we can get hey I.
Now instead of store.get all, store.get, and inside here we want to put the ID. So this is going to get a specific entry with this particular ID. If we come over to our application and then go to the console, look at, we have an error, failed to execute get on IDB object store, no key or key range specified. So do you know what the problem is? Right, that's because this is a function we are using ID, but back in our app.js file there's no ID. So ID is undefined because we've not added ID. So to add ID, comma, and then what's the ID we're using right now for this? We're getting 19, right? 19. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, look at that, success, then this specific entry, name Jane Bottas, description hey I. So get all gets all the entries, and gets a specific entry with a particular ID that matches a particular ID. Let's go back to our database.js file. I want to make our function know when the users want to get all the data or a specific entry, all the entries or a specific entry. So what we want to do is check if there's an ID, right? If there's an ID, right, if the user calls the get entry from DB function and the user has an ID as a parameter, then the store.get method should be called. Else, if the user does not add an ID as a parameter, if we have only store name, in that case the store.get all method should be called. So if I do this, if I come over here and I do get entry from DB and store name bio, just this, right, get entry from DB bio, they should get all the entries in the bio object store. But if I decide to add a comma here and 8, this should get only one entry that matches this ID 8. You get this key 8. So we want to add that extra functionality to our get entry from DB function, and that's not going to be difficult. All we're going to do is check if there's an ID. So what we can do is this: if id store.get id else store.get all. Right, so but we're not going to be doing it this way, because to do this we'll have to assign this to a variable. So const get data, this will not be this will have to be get data equal to store, because we want to declare the data before this. So let's get data, and then get data is equal to store.get id else store get data equal to store.get all. All right, this is going to work. So we won't need this anymore, but there's an easier way to achieve this. So let's remove this, and then instead of all that, we'll have const get data, and then we're just going to use the ternary operator. So id, if there's an id, right? This is like a question: is there an id? If there's an id, store.get id. So this is like a question: is there an id? If yes, get data, right? Const get data is equal to store.get id, or else, you see this, store.get all. Let's read it together. Const get data is equal to, is there an id? Have the user provided an id in the function call? If yes, store.get this particular id. If no, so this column we can see here is else. If no, then get all the data. Did you get that? Right. So this should work. Let's try with our app.js file. So first of all, we want to get the specific ID, specific entry 19. All right, look at the specific entry, Jane Butter, description, hey, I. But what if we move 19 and then try again? Amazing, look at this. We have all the entries. This is awesome. So this is what we've learned so far. We've learned how to add entry to the to our object store, our database. We learned how to get entry from that, get a single entry, get all the entries. Now let's see how we can call the functions we've just created in the application. For example, we want to be able to call the addEntryToDb method when the submit button is clicked here. So inside this bio module, when we write Jane Butters and click on submit, we want to be able to call the get entry from DB method at that point. Let's see how we can do that.
Now to save the input from our edit bio form to our IndexedDB on submit, what we're going to do is add an event listener to our form. So let's go back to our code, and right over, we'll go to bio.js, and here's what we want to do. First of all, we'll get the form, so const edit bio form equal to document.querySelector edit bio form. And after we've gotten the form, we'll get the input. So the input for the form, let's give it an ID. Okay, the ID's name. So name equal to document.querySelector. And then let's add another input for the description. Let's make this more specific. So instead of name, let's have bio name instead. Bio description. So bio name. And bio name. Oh, we already have a name here. We won't be needing this on line 2 anymore. Let's remove that and let's replace this with Jane Butters. Okay, bio description. Alright, so we have the form, we have the bio name and the bio description. But what we want to do is edit bio form dot add event listener. We'll listen for submit, so when the submit button is clicked, and then we'll call the function. Okay, so first of all, we're getting the name. This document.querySelector name, don't forget dot value. Same thing with bio description. So this is an input field, and to get the value from the input field, it has to be that element dot value. So right here, we want to call our addEntryToDb function. Alright, now when this is clicked, we want to run addEntryToDb, and then inside the addEntryToDb function, bio, remember we're adding to the bio, so the addEntryToDb function, store name, and then entry. So the store name is bio, and the entry is going to be bio name and bio description. Now let's see if this is going to work. Alright, so this is a blank screen, and then let's look at the console for the error. Look at this, cannot read property value of null at bio.js5. So feel free to pause this video and then see if you can figure out what this problem is and why. Okay, now let's go back to application and see what it is. So cannot read property value of null at bio.js line 5. This is bio.js and this is line 5. So property value of null. That means that document or query selector name is returning null. But then we have this document or query selector name here, right, in this bio function. And this is it. To be sure, this is ID name. And look at it right here on line 22. Okay, ID bio name. Alright. Okay, let's quickly change this to bio name. Okay, that's bio name. Yeah, but then we should still get the same error message. Okay, cannot read property value of null bio.js5. So we have it right here. Bio name and bio name, this is ID. So what's wrong? What's the problem? Here's what we're trying to do. This is the bio function, and we're calling the bio function in app.js. Look at app.js. We're calling the bio function. At the point we're calling the bio function, it starts with this. It starts running edit form, document query selector, bio, edit bio form. Looking for this, it looks for this, it looks for this. Now we get here, right? Bio name, document query selector, hash bio name. Now it's, if there was no dot value here, it would have been fine, would have not received an error. But now that we have dot value, it needs to get the value of this. So there would have been a problem if this was maybe edit bio form dot value. The problem would have started from line 4. And that's because we're trying to get this edit bio form, right? We're assuming that there is a form in the document right now. And we're assuming that there's an input field in the document right now with bio name, ID, and all that. We're trying to get all these before adding it to our document object model, right? Before adding it to our application. This is the point where we're getting it, and this is the point where we're adding it. So we're trying to get it before we add it. So right now it's null. Right now it's not there, right? And then this is where we're adding it. So this would have been okay if we could call this after the return statement right here, but we can't do that because return terminates a function. So remember what we did earlier. We'll have to do this in the app.js. Now to do this in the app.js, we're getting the problem right now, and that's that the app.js file is doing too much already. We have a lot. There's a lot going on in the app.js file, and it's just difficult to figure out what's this supposed to be for. Why do we have so many things here? So let's separate these different event listeners in different files. There's a reason we created folders for each modules. They all have their own directory. So we have bio.css, bio.js. Okay, edit bio form has already been declared, so this is a different error right now. Edit bio form has already been declared, and look at this, app.js line 35. Okay, so that's because we've already declared edit bio form. Let's remove this. All right, do we need this edit bio form dot addEventListener? Okay, yeah, so this should be indented, and then this should be indented. Let's try again, and we'll reload. Okay, this works. Now here's what I was saying. There's a reason we created these different modules for these different folders for the different modules, and that's so that we can have separate everything that concerns bio should be inside the bio folder, everything that concerns gallery should be inside the gallery folder, everything that concerns nav should be inside the nav folder. So let's do the same thing for events. Let's take all bio event listeners and put it inside one file in the bio folder. So let's name that events.js. Right, so there's no need to write bio events again, since it's already inside the bio folder. Now we have events.js, and what we're going to do inside our events.js file. All right, let's come over to our app.js, and firstly we're using the get entry from DB, right? Let's copy it from here. So we'll remove this and then we'll paste it in the events.js file. Right, so we have our addEntryToDb function. Now back to our app.js. What are the different event listeners we've added for the bio? Okay, we have the edit bio form, addEventListener, submit, and all that. So let's take this first of all. We'll take these two. All right, and then we'll go back to our bio.js, rather our events.js file. Let's put everything inside a function. So let's name it add bio event listeners. Okay, equal to, now let's have all the bio event listeners, so that when we call the function, it's just going to run all the event listeners. And yeah, we'll do that in a bit. So this is for the edit bio form event listener, what we did before with what we did before the edit bio form event listener. Then back to our app.js, we have the bio name and this. Okay, so this is actually what we need, line 28. Right, edit bio form the add event listener. Yeah, so we need line 28 alongside what we have here right now. So right, I think that should be all. We'll also need bio name and bio description if we've not gotten that already. Okay, back to events, and what do we have here so far? We have name input, name output. So name inputs, name input is now bio name. So look at it, bio name. Now let's change that so this is the same thing. This does not exist anymore. We're going to remove that, and then bio name is going to come in the place of name input. Right, and these two on line 12, name bio name. Okay, so hopefully this should work. We have bio name, bio description, yeah, bio name. Okay, now let's see if we have any errors so far. Okay, still works. All right, with what we've just done, okay, this is name and name. Let's quickly edit that in the bio.js file. You know what, let me show you how we can even separate this edit bio form and make that a module on its own. So let's create, just in case we need to add something else later, because the edit bio form right now is looking very simple, right? But we are not going to be using this in application. We use something that looks a lot better with more functionality. It should not be it might include more things than just name and description. So first of all, we're going to change the placeholder for the description to description on line 14, and then let's take this edit bio form, and what we're going to do is create a new file for edit bio form. Remember, edit modules, we're starting them with capital letters, so editbio.js. Now inside our editbio.js, we want to create a function, editbio equal to, okay, then we're going to return what we copied. Right, so this is the edit bio form and indent. Okay, now we have our edit bio form. Let's export it back to our bio.js file. We're going to import the edit bio form. Now we can call our edit bio form. So before we close the section, okay, let's try our application again. Awesome. So we have our edit bio form. But right now, look at, you see that the event listeners are not working. Jane, description, hey, and we click on submit. So the event listeners are not working right now. Let's make them work. So we have our events, we have the event listeners inside here. The next thing we're going to do is export the events. So let's do that here on line 17. Export default, add bio event listeners. Okay, back to our app.js file. Let's import. So right after the bio.js file is imported, let's import the add bio event listeners. Remember to add the .js at the end. And now we have the add bio event listeners. What we're going to do is call the add bio event listeners right inside the request.onSuccess method. Let's do that inside the request.onSuccess method. Okay, so remember, we don't need this anymore, the add bio function, add entry to bio the db function and get entry from db function. We don't need them right now inside the request.onSuccess property. So now that this is done, let's try again. Okay, so name Jane, description, hey, I'm Jane, and then we click on submit. Okay, there's a problem. Now let's go back to our event.js file. Oh, look at this, line 22, we're supposed to call this function. Okay, let's try again. Look at that, entry added to bio. And then go to application, IndexedDb should be the last one. Okay, let's clear the object store and try again. Okay, so we have Jane and then hey, I'm Jane, we submit and refresh. Okay, look at that. So bio name Jane, bio description, hey, I'm Jane. So that's it for using the add bio to event listener in our form. Now let's see how we can make our form look better than this, at least something that we can use for now. Okay, now remember that we created a bio.css file that we've not used yet, so let's start using it. We'll come over to the style.css file and we'll look for properties with the bio. So I hope it's just this one. Let's search for bio, and yeah, so we have just this one. Now we'll take it out of here and let's put it in the bio.css file so that everything that concerns bio is inside the bio folder. So this is the bio.css file. And okay, now how do we make this work? Let's go back to application and see what it looks like. Our bio is without the styling. Now to make this work, what we're going to do is convert to the style.css file and import. So we use the @import keyword, and then I think this should be it. I'm not sure I remember. Let's quickly search. Import CSS file @import. This is it. So there's no need for the parentheses we added. So @import space, and then let's navigate to module/bio/bio.css. That should be it, right? Yeah. Okay, and then we'll close with, yeah, I think they should be double quotes. Okay, so remember, when you're not sure about something, you forget the syntax, or you don't know how to go about a particular thing, there's Google. Feel free to search. It's totally okay. All right, now this is this, and let's try our application again and see. Now we can close this, and yeah, so we have our styling. Now the next thing we're going to style. So since we've imported bio.css file, whatever change we make in the bio.css file is going to reflect in our application. So what we're going to do next is style the edit form. Let's see, we wanted to want to place it on top of the edit modal so that it's not coming down. Right, let's just put it on top. Let's make it look like a modal. So position should be absolute, and by default display should be none. But before that, let's see what we're styling, and then by default display should be none, and it should only show up when we click on the edit by you button. So right now what we're going to do is see how we can, let's remove this. Let's see how we can center it, at least put it to where the name and description is. So for that, left 0, right 0, and then margin left. So this is a good way to center absolute position elements. Margin left auto, margin right auto. Okay, let's see what we have. Now we have to give it a width and a height. So width, let's try 15 em. Height 10 em. Okay, let's see what we're doing. So background brown, just so we can see what we're doing. Okay, let's reduce the height. Let's make the 7 em, and then we make the width wider. Now let's give it a padding. Then text align center. Okay, we're getting somewhere. We change the background to white. Then let's add a box shadow. I think that's manageable for now. Let's just add a line break to after the description input field to bring the submit button down. I don't want to focus too much on the CSS right now. Please make this look good when you're building yours. Take the extra time and make this look good. But our focus right now is not on the CSS. Our focus is on the JavaScript. So let's go to the edit bio form, and then we just add a BR right after the description. There's a better way to do this, and you can do this with CSS. There's a line break, and this will take the submit button down. Alright, so we have the submit button here. Now let's quickly style the input. Give it a margin bottom of 0.5 em, and let's give it a width of, yeah, I think that looks good. Height also, add a height. Make this 2.5. Alright, finally we'll just do something for the button. So edit by your form, and then button, background. We'll make our button brown. We'll use a color picker for this. So you notice that I always change this from RGB, and that's because it's good to stick with one style of coloring, one method of coloring, or rather. So instead of writing black #000, since that's the style we're using to color our application, so that you're not doing RGB and then you're doing this and then you're using named colors and all that. Try to stick with one style, one method. So this is the background, and then let's give it a color white. Cursor on hover should be pointer, and height should be 2 em should do. Okay, yeah, this should work for now. So we'll also add the required attributes to the input fields, so that we can't submit without the user writing something inside the input field. So required. Try submitting again. Please fill out this field. Awesome. Now let's hide the edit bio form by default. Come back to the come back to the bio.css file, and then let's give it a display of none. So we'll do that first before the position. So by default, display is none. So when we click on the edit bio button, we want to see the edit bio form. Back to the events.js file. Let's add another event listener. So this is the edit bio form. The addEventListener submit. We'll add an event listener to the edit bio button. What do we have for the edit bio button? So this is the edit bio file. That should be in the bio.js file. So this is the edit bio button, right on line 12, and we just have button. Let's give it a class. So we'll give it a class on line 12, class of edit bio button. Now that we have that, we can target it in the events.js file. So on line 5, const edit bio button equal to document or query selector. Okay, so that's the edit bio button. Now we have the edit bio button. We want to add an event listener to it. Edit bio button. So that it makes more sense to put it before the edit bio form.addEventListener, because we'll use the button before we use the form, right? So all these things matter. I'm not coming to put it down here, right? It's just like reading the book, what comes before what. So we are using the button before we use the form, so that's why I'm doing it. I'm putting it right before the edit bio form. So edit bio button.addEventListener, click, and when the button is clicked, we run a function. So edit bio form, we have the edit bio form dot style dot display block. So remember, it's none by default, and then when we click on the button, we're changing it to block. So let's try again. All right, so we have our application. We click on the button and we should see something, but nothing is showing up. So what's the problem? Console cannot read property addEventListener of null. So what's null? Edit bio button, right? Remember to look at the error line. This is events.js 7. So this is 7. Cannot read property addEventListener of null, edit bio button. So that means edit bio button does not exist. Look at our mistake here. EIDT instead of EDIT. So these spelling mistakes are common. Now let's try again. Awesome. Okay, so we have the edit bio button, but we need a way to close it also. Let's quickly add a cancel button. So button type button instead of submit, and right here cancel. Let's give it a class. Cancel edit bio. Okay. Now back to the events.js file. What we're gonna do is get the cancel button. So let's name this cancel form button. Go to document dot query selector. What did we name it? Back to edit bio. Cancel edit bio. Copy this and then paste. So this is our cancel form button. Now let's add our cancel form button after we've used the form. So when we've clicked on the edit bio button, we get to see the form, right? And now we can see the form, we can take action on it. So cancel form button dot add event listener, click. So it's just like a reverse of what we did before. So click, we'll run a function, and then edit bio form dot style dot display equal to none. So here on line 9 we say style display equal to block, and on line 23 equal to none. Let's try again. Edit bio, click on the cancel button. So we have a mistake here with the cancel spelling. So there's an extension, I don't remember what the name is, it's been long I used it, but there's an extension, something like dictionary, that helps you check for spelling mistakes. So when you mix up letters in a word, it'll underline that letter, right? So you can just search for dictionary in the extension pane or words check, something like that. You should see something close to what I'm talking about. So where's our cancel button? Right in the edit bio form, right? So CANCEL. This is a cancel button. Let's see that again. So this is cancel, submit. Please fill out this field. Jane, hey, I'm Jane, submit, entry added to bio. Now there's a problem, and let's see what that problem is. Look at when we come over to bio, our bio object store, we can see so many bios, but then it's just one user. We don't have like multiple users. This is a personal Instagram, remember, so it's supposed to be just one. What we have here, right? 6 keys, 63, 64, 65. Want to see just one entry. When we add a new entry, it should delete the other entries and just previous entry and replace it with the one. So when we add a new entry, we should just replace the previous one instead of adding multiple entries, because it's just one bio, one description. Now let's see how we can make that happen. So when we add an entry, it should delete the previous entry and then add this particular entry. So we should replace the previous entry with the new entry. Let's see how we can make that happen. Back to our database.js file, let's create a function for clearing all entries. So we'll see how to do that, right? We'll create a function named clear all entries. So whenever we call this function and put in the object store, it should clear all entries in that particular object store. So store name as a parameter, and then what do we want to do now? First of all, let's get the database. So database is equal to let's see, request of results. All right, then transaction, just like we did before, database.transaction. Feel free, you probably forget this, and even after you do it, even if you do it 10 times today, you probably forget it tomorrow. Feel free to always come back to what you've done before and check out what you did. It's okay, in a week time, in a month time, in a year time, feel free to come back to your previous work and check out what you did. That's fine. Or you search, you check the documentation. It's totally okay. You don't have to memorize the syntax. When you continuously use it, it'll stick to your head. So we have transaction, database.transaction, and then inside here the store name. Now what we're doing, since we're deleting from the object store, we are writing to it. Remember I explained read, write. Read, get, write, edit, delete, update. So we are writing to read. That means we'll add the read, write argument. All right, so this is a read, write argument, and then const store equal to transaction dot object store, then the store name. So the store name from our parameter. Finally, store dot clear. Okay, now here's a reminder that what I'm doing right now, the way I'm structuring this application, is something that has not been done before. Even myself, I've not done this before, right? It's what I'm doing with you together, right? It's on this application. I thought about this before the video and try to create a structure before making this video, but I've not done the previous projects and I've not seen anyone else do it. So it's fine if it seems a little confusing. Take a pause, relax, then go through it again, or rewatch the video, try to do it step by step, try to do it on your own, come back to it and see if you can understand it. But it's fine if you don't get it right the first time. It's fine if you don't get it the first time. There's totally no problem with that. I'm okay with that. So feel free to rewatch the video as many times as you want, and try to do it on your own. That'll really help. So store.clear is a function. Now that we have that, let's export the clear all entries function. Clear all entries. Now we've exported the clear all entries, we'll go back to the events.js file and we're going to import it with the addEntryToDb. So clear all entries. Now what we're going to do, when the submit button is clicked, right, edit bio form addEventListener submit. When it's clicked, right before we add the new entry to the database, we're going to clear all the entries there. So we'll remove all the previous entries and then add the latest entry. So clear all entries bio. So that's all we need to do. Now let's try again. Edit bio name Jane, hey, I'm Jane, submit. Now let's refresh this. Look at that. So we have only one entry for the bio. Now for the gallery, we can have as many entries at a time for galleries, because like we have so many entries in the gallery, so many images and all that. But for bio, we have just one entry. You know, that's just what we need right now. So this works. When we click on the submit button, that is done. Now the next thing we're going to do is you know, hide this form after we click on the submit button. So let's quickly do that by coming over to the edit bio form.addEventListener. Here we have addEntryToDb, and we'll do basically the same thing we did here in the cancel form button. So right there, edit bio form.style.display equal to none. Now when we click on the edit bio, Jane, hey, I'm Jane, submit. So look at that. Awesome. Now that we've successfully implemented adding data to our database, adding entries to our database, and we've done it, right, we've learned how to do it. How do we get entries from the database? How do we get entries from the DB? We've added bio to the DB. How can we get it? Because right now what we're seeing is still what we put there in the HTML file. Jane, hi, I'm Jane. I used to be IndexedDb, but now I'm not so sure. Whereas when we go to the database, right, application, and then bio, what we can see is bio name Jane, and then bio description says something else. Bio description says undefined. Okay, we didn't catch that earlier on. Let's see what the problem is quickly. So bio description document a query selector all. Okay, that's a problem. So query selector, not query selector all. Now let's try that again. Edit bio, name Jane, hey, I'm Jane, submit. Okay, then let's refresh. Okay, look at that. Hey, I'm Jane. So what we have in the database is different from what we have here. So just like what we did in local storage, where we used a variable instead of the hard-coded text, we're going to do the same thing here. Remember that we have a get entry from DB function. So when we go to the database.js file, we can see that we have a get entry from DB function. But then this function does not return anything. The function just does stuff and console logs to the console. Here's what we want to do now. Let's go to the bio.js file and then we'll import the get entry from DB function, because we want to use the bio entry from the DB inside this bio module. So imports from database.js. So what are we importing? Get entry from DB. Now here's what we want to do. Remember what we did with local storage earlier in the course, where we used the JavaScript template literals to add the information from the local storage inside our HTML file. So let's do that here. Const user info, and then user info should be get entry from DB, and then we're taking an argument bio. So since this is our user info, let's see what the user info returns. Let's see what get entry from DB is supposed to log to the console. Database.js. Right now we're logging on success get data.result. So let's see what that is. Yeah, we have an error. Now look at this. Failed to read the result property from IDB request. The request has not finished. Okay, now look at the line. At get entry from DB 3328 at bio 520. Get entry from DB 3328, and then bio line 550. Now this means that we are trying to get result here. When we call the get entry from DB function, we're trying to get the request.result, and this is being called before request.onSuccess. So before the database has been created in our app.js, we're calling the bio function. So we call the bio function first. Look at this. Look at what we're calling the bio function first in line 13, and then we're calling the app function in line 19. And this is being called before request.onSuccess. So before the database has been successfully created, we're calling the bio function, and inside the bio function, we're calling the get entry from DB function. And inside the get entry from DB function, we're trying to access request.result. So for now, let's comment out this line so that we can see what our get entry from DB returns. So we'll go to the console, and then what we're going to do is call it in our app.js file. Remember, we want to use it to structure our HTML, our bio HTML file in a bit. So we have getEntry from DB here, and then we'll call getEntry from DB inside request.onSuccess. So when we call this, we're supposed to get our console.log statement. Alright, failed to execute transaction on IDB database. One of the specified object store was not found. So we're supposed to put in the parameter on line 23 bio, and then let's try that again. So success. Now this is an array. It's an array, and inside the array you have an element. So array, the first element has an index of 0. So we are looking for a way to access bio name and bio description. We have an array, and inside the array you have an object which is its first element. So when we want to access it in bio.js, we should have something like this. So this is const user info equals to get entry from DB. Let's put what we're going to do in comments. So because whenever we save, our page reloads. If we put it without the comments, then we won't get this result anymore. We'll get an error message instead. So we have const user info equal to get entry from DB. The next thing we want to do to access, let's see. Now to access bio name from user info, we want something like this. Const bio name equal to, now look at this. We expect user info to be an array, and the array has an object. So array has only one element, but that element has an index of 0. So this is array user info. It has only one element, which is an object with an index of 0. So to access this object, this first element, we do this user info, then in square brackets 0. Now we have our object. To access bio name and bio description from our object, it will be user info square bracket 0 dot bio name. So look at it. User info square bracket 0 dot bio name, and then user info square bracket 0 dot bio description. And then to use it on line 14 and line 15, so where we have Jane Butters in the description, remember what we did with local storage. So we have a template literal, and then we can either go straight to bio name and bio description, or we can do this user info 0 dot bio name. So when we do this, it means we will need this line 6 anymore, and we'll do the same thing for the description. So we want to have something like this. Now right now this is going to return an error, but ultimately when we're done, we want our application to work like this. We want to get the user info, and then from the user info we want to get user info.bio name, user info.description. So let's see what the error is now. It should take us back to the previous error. So failed to read the result property from IDB request. The request has not finished. So how do we wait for the request to finish before using it? That's the next question. How do we wait for the request to finish before using it? So now we're trying to use user info and call the getEntry from DB function. Right, even when we call this getEntry from DB function to get bio, and we are trying to use it, so this request will still be in process. Remember, IndexedDb is asynchronous. So when we're calling this request, the next line is not going to wait for this getEntry from DB function, the one calling our IndexedDB database. The next line is not going to wait for that call to be complete before it runs, because it's asynchronous. So which means that while this is still running, while this is still trying to get data from the database, we're already trying to use it on line 12. So that's not also going to work. We have a problem with trying to get entry from DB before the database has been initialized, and we have a problem with trying to use data from our getEntry from DB function before the transaction has been completed. So what if there was a way we could wait for this function to run first of all? Remember, it's asynchronous. What if there was a way we could make it synchronous instead? Wait for line 5 to run before line 12 and 13. So wait for line 5 to run before returning this from line 6 to line 17, before the return statement. So if there's a way we could do this, await and then get entry from DB. So this means that when we say await get entry from DB, we're telling our codes to wait for this function to complete. We're waiting for this transaction to be complete before you go to the next line. So if this is possible, if we successfully do this, it means we've solved the second problem of waiting for the transaction to be complete before trying to access userinfo.bioname and userinfo.description. So if we could do this, how do you think we can fix the next problem? Right, by going to app.js and saying, okay, right where you have, okay, let's remove line 23. We don't need line 23 anymore. So right where you have the bio function being called, what if we could decide and say, okay, wait, right, the next one is to wait. Now we're calling the bio function here, and we say wait for the transaction in this getEntryFromDB method to finish, to be complete, right, before returning anything. But if we do that, right, and we go back to our app.js file, it's still going to run bio, the bio function, right, and then the bio function itself will still be running. It's waiting, right? The bio function is on its own. Look, this is the bio function here. The bio function will keep waiting for getEntryFromDB, and then we're already on line 14 and 15, right? So the bio function will be waiting for getEntryFromDB to be called, but then it's going to skip line 13, right, while it's waiting, and go to line 14, line 15, and then rootdiv.innerHTML and add bio event listeners on line 22. And remember, add bio event listeners needs line 13 to work because it's the bio event listener. But then while it's running add bio event listener, line 13 is unavailable. So instead, we are going to also wait for line 13 to complete. So first of all, in the bio.js function, we are waiting for the getEntryFromDB function to be complete. And then back to the app.js function, we are waiting for the bio function to be complete. Now that we've done that, let's only render the rootdiv.innerHTML. Let's call this app function only after the database has been successfully run. So if we do this, right, we take line 19 and put it inside the request.onSuccess method. So if the request is successful, remember our app depends on database to function. So if the database is not available, it means we won't have our images, we won't have the bio, we won't have anything. So we want to have a way to say, okay, only render this app, the navbar, the bio, the gallery, because they're all dependent on the database. Only render it when the database is complete. When the database has been successfully initialized. If not, if there's an error in initializing the database, render something else. So request.on error. If there's an error in initializing the database, render something else. So you could decide to render something like, there was an error initializing this database, or maybe it's a connection. You're trying to access database outside your application. Let's say it's not IndexedDb anymore, it's database that needs internet connection, and there's a problem. You can decide to say, this problem is from internet connection, or your browser does not support IndexedDB, and all that. So we need to be able to do something on line 25. So if it's successful, we give them the gallery, all the images, the bio, and all that. And if the database initialization is not successful, then we do something on line 25. Now we have request.onSuccess rootdiv.innerHTML on line 20. Look at the app function again. The app function is waiting for the bio event listener to be complete. And while the app function is waiting for the bio event listener to be complete before it renders and returns navbar, bio, and gallery to our application, add bio event listener is already running. So while the app function is waiting, it's going to the next line on line 21, and add bio event listener is already running. Now remember, add bio event listener can't work without the bio, and then the bio is inside the app. So we have to wait for this app function to be complete again. So await app function to be complete. Now to use the await keyword in JavaScript, the parent function has to be asynchronous. So we have to use the async keyword when creating the function. That means that right here on line 19, we'll have async before we're calling the function. And same thing with line 9. So wherever we use the await keyword, we're going to add the async. And then bio.js, we add async. So the parent function has to have the async keyword, has to be created with the async keyword to make it asynchronous. This will tell us that this function is an asynchronous function. Then inside this asynchronous function, we can now use the await keyword. So this is just syntax. Remember, you don't have to memorize everything. You can come back to this video, come back to the application you've written before, your code you've written before, and look at it, then go back. When you use it consistently, it's going to stick in your head, but then there's no need trying to memorize everything. Now look at the app.js function. I'll wait as async here, and async. Now before we added this, there was an error. There's an indication on line 20, this 3 dotted line. So await has no effect on the type of this expression. We can't use await on app because it's not asynchronous right now. So we added the async keyword to app, made it an asynchronous function, and then that disappears. Now back to our bio.js file. We have a await here again. Await has no effect on this type of expression. So this function is not an asynchronous function on its own. What is asynchronous inside the getEntryFromDB function is this database.transactions, right? The course of the IndexedDb, those are asynchronous on it because IndexedDB is asynchronous. But then the getEntryFromDB function itself is not asynchronous. So to make it asynchronous, what do? That's right, we add the async keyword. Now let's see our browser. There's probably going to be an error. So let's address the errors from the beginning. Now look at the first error. Cannot read property addEventListener of null app.js line 29. Let's see app.js line 29. This is app.js and this is line 29. Follow input.addEventListener. Okay, let's comment this out for now. We don't need this for now, so that we address the immediate problem. Cannot read property 0 of undefined bio.js line 12. This is bio.js line 12. So we're trying to get 0, right? User info 0. Now this is supposed to return something, right? Back to our database.js file. You can see that our function getEntryFromDB does not return anything. So a function that does not return anything returns undefined by default. To confirm that, we'll go back to the bio.js file and then let's log to the console user info. So look at user info undefined. I put it in the curly brace just so that we know what we are logging to the console. It comes out as an object, user info, and then value. So alternatively, we could do this, just console.log user info, and then back here we can see it undefined. So how do we get our getEntryFromDB function to return the data? How do we make our getEntryFromDB function return getData.result? I want you to pause this video and see if you can figure that out. Give that a go, and when you're done, play Let's Continue from there. If not, stay with me. Now here are a few things we could try. We could come over to line 44, and after line 44 do this: return getData.result. Right, let's go back to our application and see what we have. Now look at the error message here. Failed to read the result property from IndexedDb request. The request has not finished. So we're trying to return getData.result when the request has not finished. So how do we return it inside the getData.onSuccess? Can we do this? Can we do return getData.results inside here? And would that work for outside the function? No, that would not work. Cannot be property 0 of undefined. We're back to the other one because this returns for just this function right here. You can't make a return statement from inside a function that affects its parent function. So we can't do this and then expect this return to affect the parent function getEntryFromDB. This return getData.result is only going to affect the getData.onSuccess method. Now, a way we could return our data and access getData.result only when the request has been successfully made, it's by using promises. From line 33 to line 34, let's wrap that inside a promise. If you've not heard of promises before, I want you to pause this video again and try to read up on promises or watch a quick video on promises to fully understand what we're doing. So we are creating a promise, a new promise, and then our promise is going to take two parameters, resolve and reject. And then inside here, inside this promise we just created, let's copy line 36 to line 47 and put it inside the promise function. Okay, now that we've created this promise, we can now return the promise. Now let's see our browser. And right, we still have a blank screen. Now that's because when we go to the bio.js, user info get entry from DB. This get entry from DB function is returning a promise, and we're waiting for that promise to be resolved back in the database.js file. Instead of returning just the promise, let's return the resolved promise. This should be promise of resolve, and then data. Okay, let's try again. We still have a blank screen, and that's because we are returning the resolve promise, but our promise does not know what it should do when it's resolved. So remember, we pass a resolve parameter when creating our promise function. Get data.onSuccess. So when the data has been successfully gotten, this is where we should tell our promise what to resolve. Whatever we put inside the resolve function is what our promise will return. So when the data has been successfully gotten, we'll resolve get data.results. If our call is successful, our promise should return get data result. So promise.resolve, this resolve get data.results. And look at what the reject is for. Let's say we get an error instead. Then we can do this. Reject get data.error. Right. So when we do this, if we're also expecting an error with this through this reject method, it means we can instead return just the promise here on line 50. We return just the promise and then resolve it in the bio.js file. Let's go back to our browser and see the result. Awesome. This works. Now look at this. Success, bio name Jane, bio description, hey, I'm Jane. And this reflects in our Instagram application, Jane, hey, I'm Jane. Remember what we did in the bio.js file. For the name, userinfo0.bioname, and for the about, userinfo.bio description. So this is what we have. Now we have Jane and hey, I'm Jane, our bio name and our bio description right from our IndexedDB database. Let's edit and see what we'll have. So instead of Jane, let's have Jane Bottas, and for description, hey, I'm awesome. Submit this, entry added to bio. Now let's reload. So look at that, Jane Bottas, hey, I'm awesome. Let's try again. Jane and then hey, submit. So you see that the name is changing, but then the description is not changing until we reload. Can you guess why that's happening? Now let's go back to our application. When we go to the events, the bio form event listeners, we can see that we're editing the name output.inner text on line 17. So whenever we edit the user entry, this edit bio form, we're editing the name output.inner text on line 17. So let's remove this from line 17 and then let's bring it down to line 20. So let's do this after the addEntryToDb function has been called. So after we add our entry to our database, then we edit the name output.inner text. Let's also edit the bio output. So let's name this about output instead, right? Description output or about output. What do we call it? Let's call it bio description output, and we'll call this bio name output instead of just name output. Try to make your variable names easy to understand. There's nothing wrong with writing long variable names. So we have bio name output, and we're going to copy that and paste it on line 21 instead of name output. Now let's do the same thing for bio description output. So bio description output is equal to documents.querySelector. So let's go to the bio.js file and see the class we gave our bio output. So bio.js file, and the bio output has a class of about. Now back to the events.js file. This is going to be document.querySelector.about on line 17. Now we have our bio description output. Let's come back to line 21 and then line 22. Bio, after we add the entry to DB, bio description output, that's the element.inner text, equal to bio description. I think that should be bio description. Yeah, equal to bio description. All right, so let's try this again. We have Jane and we have hey. So we change this to Jane Bottas and hey, I'm awesome. Submit. Amazing. Look at this, Jane Bottas. Hey, I'm awesome. So this is amazing. this is amazing. We've really come along. We've done a great job so far. Understanding what database is, IndexedDB, how to add entry to the DB, get entry from the DB, remove entry from the DB, and all that. Now let's see how we can add images to our database next.
Hey, alright. Before we start adding images to our database, let's quickly look at something. Now, when we come over to our database, our IndexedDB database, and let's say, for instance, this is the bio object store. When we initially load our application, there's nothing in the bio database. There's nothing in the database at all until we add data to the database. So let's assume that this database is empty, and then we reload our page. You see that we have a blank screen. Now let's go to the console and see what the error is. So look at this. Type error, cannot read property bio name of undefined at bio.js line 13. So let's see what's on line 13. So this is the bio.js file, and here we have line 13. So look at the error again. Cannot read property bio name of undefined. So this is bio name and this is user info 0. So user info 0 is undefined. Just to be sure, look at this. Let's console.log user info on line 6. And then look at the user info returns an empty array. That's because the database is currently empty. So how can we fix this? When the user initially opens the application, that means this is all they're going to see since the database is empty. Now to fix that, instead of having just user info 0.bioname on line 13, let's add an if-else expression. So we use the ternary operator for this. If there's user info 0, then return user info 0.bioname. If not, return nothing. That's an empty string. We'll do the same thing for line 14. If there's user info 0, then return user info 0.biodescription. If not, if user info 0 is undefined, return an empty string. So let's try again. Alright, you see that what we have here is just edit bio. This is better than a blank screen, so let's leave it at this for now. You can add any other thing you want to add later on, or maybe a hint to the user, hey, update your bio so that we can see your bio information and all that. But this is a lot better than a blank screen. So right now our database is empty, but our application still loads. You can edit bio and add the name Jane Butters, and hey, I'm Jane. We submit, and look at that. We reload and we still have our data. Alright, now let's see how we can add images to the database. Hey, now to add data to our database, to add images to our database, remember what we did in the app.js file? This one we commented out. Let's take this, and we won't be needing line 33 to line 36. So line 28 to line 31, let's take this and we'll paste it in the events.js file for gallery. So we'll create an events.js file right in the gallery folder, just the same way we did for the bio module. Right in the gallery folder, we have an events.js file, and then const add gallery event listeners. So this is a function, and then we'll paste it inside there. So here's what we have. Line 2, const photo input, document query selector, hash photo input. So let's be sure that this is the correct ID for our photo input. We'll go to the gallery.js file inside the gallery folder, and then okay, yeah, that's the ID. Line 3, we have photo input. Alright, now back to the events.js file. What we're doing on line 3, photo input.addEventListener change. So on change, that's when it's been selected and the file has been added. When we've selected an image, then console.log photo input.value. Here's what we have so far. Oh, of course we can't test this now because add gallery event listeners has not been exported. So we export add gallery event listeners. Alright, and then we import in the app.js file. So let's do that under the gallery. Alright, so right here where we call the add by event listeners on line 22, let's call add gallery event listeners, and then we'll try and then let's open our application again. Okay, so when we click on this plus icon and select an image, we are supposed to see something. So click on the button, and then to select, let's go to desktop. Alright, so let's select an image. Okay, so we have this. Now here's what we're logging to our console in the events.js file, photo input.value, and this is the photo input.value. Now instead of photo input.value, photo input.files. So we try again, and then so here's the difference. Photo input.value returns a fake path to the file, and photo input.files return the files we selected. To get that particular file we selected, we see that this is an array. This is an array, and then the file is in the first index 0. So to get that, we're going to do this index 0, photo input.files square bracket 0. Now let's try again. We'll click, and then we select a file. Awesome. So this is what we have. Now the next thing we're going to be doing, instead of just logging photo input.files to the console, let's create a reader. Now when we hover on this file reader, we see that the description for this function says lets web applications asynchronously read the contents of files or raw data stored on the user's computer using file or blob objects to specify the file or data to read. So we want to use this reader to read our images and then store them as text. Now the next thing we're going to do is this reader.read as dataURL. Then photo inputs dot files. So what we just logged to the console, photo input.files 0. After this, we're going to add an addEventListener to a reader variable. Reader dot addEventListener load. So on load for the reader, we're going to call the function, and then inside here going to log to the console reader.results. Now let's see what we have. Click to add an image and select an image. Okay, look at this, read arrow is not defined, so let's fix that. This is on line 9. Change that to reader. We'll try again. Awesome. So this is our data URL for our file for that particular image we selected. Data image /jpeg base64, and then we have all this text that represent the image. The next thing we're going to do, instead of just logging this to the console, remember that back in the database.js file, we have an addEntryToDb function. So let's import that function to our events.js file for gallery. Instead of just logging that to the console, we'll be adding it to our database. So import database.js. Remember to add the .js, and inside here addEntryToDb. Now instead of console.log result on line 11, let's do this. addEntryToDb. What does our addEntryToDb function take? We hover on it, and then we can see store name, any, and entry. So store name first, and then entry. Right, store name for this is gallery. Entry is reader.result. Okay, now we can remove line 12. We add an entry to the database. We select an entry using the plus icon. We click on something, and look at this, entry added to gallery. Now when we go over to our database and then gallery, let's refresh and look at our entry. Awesome. Now that we have that, how can we use this in our application? We've added it to the database. The next thing is to use it in our application. Do you think you can do that? If you can, pause this video and give it a try. If not, stay with me and let's do it together. Now to use our gallery entry from the database, we're going to come over to the gallery.js file. And like what we did with the bio.js module, let's import getEntry from DB. Alright, now that we have getEntry from DB, we're going to refactor this. Instead of returning this HTML code direct, let's do this. and then we wrap everything, and then we return everything inside here. This so that we can add extra JavaScript to our gallery module, a gallery function, a gallery module. So return this, and then let's move from everything from line 6 to line 30. Yeah, and indent. Okay, now that we have that, we can come over to line 4 and then const gallery data equal to get entry from DB. And what objects are we getting from gallery? Now we have get entry from DB gallery for gallery data. Let's log gallery data to the console and see what we get. Right, we have this promise pending. Remember, we need to await for this. So we need to wait for get entry from DB to finish. Uncaught syntax error, unexpected, reserved, gallery.js line 4. So JavaScript is saying await as the value of this variable gallery data, and that's because it does not know that this is an asynchronous function. So we add async, and let's try again. Alright, now we have another error. Cannot read property addEventListener of null object promise. Remember what we did for the bio module. We'll come back to the app.js file and then await the gallery module. Awesome. Now look at that. We have our data logged to the console, and this is an array with one element currently. And now to get that particular element back to our gallery.js file, we have the gallery data, right? So let's quickly add an extra anchor tag with img_src. So we just added an extra item, and instead of this link to the image, let's take from the gallery data we just got from the gallery object store from the database. Right back to line 14, img_src is going to be the template literal, and then inside of it we have gallery data. Remember, gallery data is an array, so the first element is what we want. Now let's try again. Awesome. Look at the image you just imported. This looks amazing. All right, now let's see how we can use only the images from our database. So we'll be removing all these other images, and let's use only the images from our database. Now, before we use only images from our database, let's add more images to the DB. We'll click on the plus icon and select other images. So entry added to gallery, and let's add more entry added to gallery. Awesome. Now that we have our different entries, let's get our images from just the database. Alright, since we have the get entry from DB function called and we're using it here for gallery data, and on line 14 also, we're going to be doing something similar to this, only this time we'll be using the map method. So right here on line 4, we have the const gallery data equal to await get entry from DB gallery. The next thing we're going to do is create the gallery items. So gallery items. So what we want to do is create gallery items that look like what we have from line 14 to line 16. The ahref img_rc with gallery data 0. Let's do that using the map method. So gallery item is equal to gallery data.map, and then inside this map function, so we have single photo. So if you've not used the map function before, you can pause the video and then check out JavaScript higher order functions before you come back to this. So gallery data.map, we have single photo, and then we're going to use single photo inside here. So let's copy what we did here from line 16 to line 18, and then we'll paste it. Remember, we want to use the backticks for this. So we have a backticks. Indent, very important, and yeah, we have that. What we want to do here is return this. Now remember, we have single photo as a parameter for this map function, let's use single photo inside here. So single photo represents every, just like looping through an array, single photo represents every element in this gallery data array. So single photo represents one photo, and then it loops again, gives us the next, loops again, gives us the next, until we're done with all the items in the gallery data. So that's basically how the map function works. So we are going to get this now times the number of gallery items. So the number of items in the gallery, if we have 4 items in the gallery, for example, we're going to get this 4 times. So it's going to be something like this that will have returns at the end of the day. So something like this 4 times. So this should be the first photo, and this should be the second photo, the third photo, and the fourth photo. So we can do that with just this. Now we've done that, that means we don't need line 20 to line 40 anymore. We'll get all that from the gallery items variable. So right on line 20, let's bring in the gallery items variable. We'll do that using the template literals. So we have gallery items. All right, now that we have gallery items, let's see what this looks like in our browser. Okay, we can see our images from the database. Now, as you might notice, the images are, our gallery is looking different from what it used to be. We can see so many empty spaces. But before that, I want you to notice something else. Now, when you reload, I want you to notice something else. It takes a lot of time to load our web page, and this is not a good user experience. And that's because when you go back to application and then app.js, you see that we're waiting for gallery to be called, and all the images, the images are heavy images, and we don't expect our users to put less images since they have the choice of putting whatever images they want. So images can be 2 MB, those images 2 MB, 3 MB, 5 MB, 10 MB, and so on. So the images are heavy images, and it takes time to load these images from the database and display on our browser. So that means that if there are like 50 images or with at least 5 MB, we're going to wait for maybe minutes, who knows, before we can see anything at all on the web page. So what we want to do instead is show the bio, show the nav, and maybe give our users a hint that an image is loading. Instead of showing them just a blank page, let's show them something first of all. That means we won't have to be calling this getEntryFromDB function inside our gallery.js file anymore. We don't want to do this. We want to get entry from DB and then add it to the gallery section before we even call this app function and add it to the inner HTML file. So what we want to do is call the gallery function first of all, and then after we've added everything to the app, after our application has bio, nav, and the basic structure, we can then add the images to our application. We can then add the images to our page. So see the way we did add gallery event listeners, add by event listener, we did them after we've added the app to the page. We want to also do the same thing right here on line 24. So line 25, we want to also add the gallery items from the database and put them in the gallery section. So let's see how we can do that. Okay, now let's go back to the gallery events.js file, and you see what we did before in this gallery.js file with the getEntryFromDB and gallery items.map, gallery data.map. We're going to do it inside the events.js file. So right where we're importing addEntryToDb, let's import getEntryFromDB, and then we'll create a function and name it add images to gallery. Add images to gallery, and our function is going to do the work of adding the gallery items, the images from the database, into our web page. So add images to gallery should do the same thing with what we did here. So let's copy gallery data to line 11. We can cut that since we don't need it anymore. We won't be needing it anymore. And then let's remove this, and then we should have just section. We know our section has a class of gallery. Let's go back to events.js file, and then we'll paste what we just copied. Right, so we have gallery data and we have gallery items. What we need next is the gallery section. So gallery section, remember, back to the gallery.js file, gallery section has a class of gallery. We'll copy that, and then inside the gallery section variable, let's get the elements. Document a query selector, and then dot gallery. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do after we've gotten the gallery section, we have the gallery data. Remember, see we're using an await keyword here. That means we have to make this an asynchronous function. Alright, and then we have gallery items. Let's put gallery items to use. So what we're going to do here is this: gallery section dot inner HTML. So this is after the gallery section has been added to the web page. You know, now we're adding the event listeners. Now we're adding the events rather. Gallery section dot inner HTML equal to these gallery items. Alright, now what we're going to do next is export, not only add gallery event listeners, but add images to gallery. Add images to gallery. Now we've exported them. We go back to our app.js file. Now I want you to notice something. Let's go over to the browser. See that our page is blank. Now let's go to the console and look at our console. The requested module/module/garage/event.js does not provide an export named default. So do you think you can fix this? Look at the app.js file and see if you can fix it yourself. If not, stay with me and we'll do it together. Now back to our app.js file. Notice on line 4, this is a spelling error. Add gallery event listeners. This is supposed to be $L. So let's remove that first of all and see if that fixes anything. We still have the same thing. So we'll go back and now we have to import add gallery event listeners the same way we imported request addEntryToDb, get entry from DB, because we're no longer exporting it as default anymore. So add gallery event listeners and add images to gallery. Now we have the add gallery event listeners. Let's call the add images to gallery function add images to gallery. Alright, now that we have that, you can see that we've gotten rid of that particular error, but we have another problem. First of all, when we go to our page, you can see this, we have object promise, and then in the console we have an error message here: uncalled type error, cannot read property addEventListener of null, events.js line 5. So let's see event.js line 5. Now this is events.js and line 5 photo input.addEventListener. So we're trying to get photo input, right? And if we go back to the gallery.js file, you'll notice that gallery is still an async function. So this is running, right? We're running the gallery function, but then with this async keyword we put right here, we are saying you don't have to wait for gallery to complete running before you run the next one. So while gallery is still running, we are back in app.js trying to add the gallery event listeners even when we don't have gallery yet. So what we're going to do is simply remove the async keyword from the gallery module. We'll also remove the import statement on line 1 and then add an empty line between 10 and export default gallery. Alright, back to the app.js file. We have everything in order. Let's try our browser again. Awesome, so we don't have that error anymore. Now for the next issue, let's reload and see how long it will take for our browser to show us anything. Okay, amazing. So we have this first of all, and then before the images appear, we can see something. The idea is that we're not given a blank screen. We know that the application is working. We don't have a feeling that the application has crashed or it's not working or it's not functioning. We know the application is working by seeing something, and then while we are waiting for the gallery images to load. So what we can do, instead of just having a blank section for the gallery, we can add a loading icon. I'm sure you've seen this in some other apps, right? We can add a loading icon here while it's still loading, and we'll do that later on. But before that, let's see how we can fix the other issue we had. Now you notice we have an image and then we have a blank screen, we have an image and a blank screen. This is different from what we designed before. Now if you look closely, you're going to notice that there is something here, right? There's something in between the images. And let's go to the elements so that we're sure what we're doing. So we'll go to elements, we open container, and then let's open section with gallery. We open the gallery section. Now look at this. So our CSS is still working, our grid is still working. We have this element and then we have this text. We have this element and we have this text. When you hover on the section, you can see our grid, right? So we have our CSS works fine. The problem is from our JavaScript, because we have this element, right, and we have another text element, and then we have this element and we have another text element. So what we want to do is find a way to remove this and this and this. Now when we go back to our code and then back to the events.js file where we're adding the images to gallery, we want to look at this place closely and see how we can figure out what went wrong. Now, do you think you can do that on your own? Maybe you can try that out, but if not, stay with me and let's do it together. All right, now look at this line 19 where we have the gallery items, gallery data.map single photo. Let's log gallery items to the console and see what we'll get. Now to the console, we have so many things showing up. Just so we know what we're doing, we should remove one of these. So where's this from? Success database.js line 40. Let's go to line 40 in database.js. I want to remove the log statement, so we're going to remove the log statement on line 40. Is there any other log statement? There is one, bio.js line 6, bio.js and line 6. All right, so we know exactly what we're doing. Back to the events.js gallery file. Let's look at the console again. Now look at this. We have this array of elements, and then every element is separated by a comma. So we have the first element, right? We have the first one we added to the to our DOM, to our gallery section, and then JavaScript adds this comma. Look at the comma. If you would look at it closely, you see the comma right here, this text. JavaScript adds this comma, and then JavaScript adds the next element, and then the next comma. Look at the next comma, and then the next element, and then the next comma, the next element, the next comma. So we want to find a way to remove the commas from our HTML, our generated HTML code. Now to do that, what we want to do, look at this, see that this is a JavaScript array separated by comma. So the question should be how to remove commas from array. Yeah, now to do that we can use the array.join method. So look at where we're calling where we're adding where we're assigning the gallery items to the gallery section in our HTML element. Let's do this. So gallery items dot join and then an empty string. So this should replace all the commas with an empty string. Now let's go back to our browser. Now we're going to wait for the images to load, and awesome, amazing work. So we have our images. This is looking really awesome. We've done really amazing work so far. Now there's the next one we should do, but I won't do that. You do this yourself. And when we add an image to our browser, we add an image to the gallery. Yeah, this is added to the database, but then it does not show up in the browser yet. So the same way we did the edit bio, I want you to do this, right? When we add an image, it should show at that instance, you know, if we don't, so that we don't need to reload when we add an image to the database, yeah, before we can see it in the browser. All right, so what we're going to do next is figure out how to add a loading icon, something to show us that images are loading right here. So we'll add a loading icon to this gallery section while the images are loading, so that our users know, oh, something is going on somewhere, right? And after that, I think we should wrap it up here, and you make this app look really good on your own. Now let's start by getting a loader. I get my loaders from loading.io. So you type loading.io in your browser address bar, and then we should see our loaders come up here. All right, now the next thing we're going to do is select a loader. So let's see which one looks good. Let's go with this loader, and what we're going to do next is choose a palette for it. When we go back to our personal Instagram app, we see that we're using the blue color for the edit bio button. So we'll click on this button for selecting the color, and we'll go over to blue. Let's use this one. Now that we have that, let's click on the SVG button and then animated. Okay, we are required to log in before we can download. So let's quickly sign up or log in, whichever one. I'm going to use Google for this. Alright, that's done. Now let's click on SVG again and then animated. We'll click on free download, and we should be able to download it by right clicking and save as, or you click on the download button. So let's go with save image as, right click, then save image as. This is so that we can choose exactly where we want the image. Let's change the name to gallery loader, gallery loader.svg. Let's use camel casing instead. So we have gallery loader.svg. Now that we've saved that, we'll go back to our VS Code and hopefully we should see it there. Okay, it's right here in our VS Code. Now that we have our gallery loader.svg, it's good to separate this from we'd want to use more loaders than this moving forward. When you're working on the application, you might want to use a loader for editing the image and maybe add images, extra images, or extra audio and any other thing. So it's just good we have an assets folder for these kind of things. So let's create an assets folder and we'll move gallery loader.svg inside the assets folder. Cool. Now that we have gallery loader.svg in the assets folder, let's include it in our gallery.js file. So we want it to show while the data is being fetched from the database. We want the loader to be showing, right? We want the users to know that, hey, something is going on here. So let's do that inside the gallery module. So we'll come over to the section class gallery, and inside it, let's create an img tag. This is dot slash, right? Just to be sure we know what we're doing, let's click on the JavaScript at the bottom and choose HTML. Okay, so this should give us better suggestions. Now we can use the element extension img src, and then inside src, now that's better. We'll click on assets and then gallery loader.svg. So this is what we want. Let's remove this and then give it a class of gallery loader. Okay, so we have our image. Let's see what this looks like in the browser. Okay, so we reload and then we have our image right here. Let's try that. Now that's showing, but you can notice two things. One, it has a background, and two, it's not in the middle. So let's center it and then let's remove that background. Let's change the background to white or something so it looks like a real loader. So let's go over to the events.js file, and then what we're going to do is put this line 27 on hold for now. We'll comment this out, the gallery section.innerHTML equal to the items from the database, just so that we can see our loader until we are done editing. So we can see our loader in action right now. Then the next thing we're going to do is remove the background that the loader comes with. So we'll click on this gallery loader.svg file. This is an SVG file, so it's editable. Now when you scroll right here, so let's go to line 2 where the SVG file started with the SVG tag, right? We scroll and then we can see where it's been styled, style margin also, and then it has backgrounds 2 for RGB 241, 242, 243. When we remove this background, we should be able to see a white background. Awesome. So we have our loader without any background. This is nice. The next thing we're going to do is move this to the middle. Now to do that, we'll come back to the gallery.js file and let's see. Gallery has a great display. So what we're going to do is put the image inside a div, and then we'll style the div itself. So we have the img src, and then let's take the class out of the img tag. Then we'll move it to the div tag. So we have div class gallery loader. Now the next thing we're going to do is come over to our gallery.css file. Okay, so we've not added anything to the gallery.css file yet. Let's quickly take our gallery items and move it to the gallery.css file. So gallery items start from, I think it starts from here, gallery nav, right? So we have gallery nav, we have photo input, add photo, button, gallery item, and this. Nice. So our style.css file is looking looks better now with less items in it. you still need to change this. Remember, later on you do you do separately for nav, and then you separate the one for the bio section. All right, so right now let's do the gallery.css together. So we'll paste what we have here, and then the next thing we're going to do is import gallery.css in style.css file. Now at import, the same thing we did for bio.css, modules /gallery/gallery.css. Cool. Now let's check our browser. Nice. Looks like we still have what we want, right? There's a problem. Choose file, no info. So where's this problem from? See that line 2, we've not closed this import statement, so let's close it right now and we'll try again. Nice, we have a plus button back. Okay, now that we've done that, let's go back to the gallery.css file, and we want to style the gallery loader class. Remember, so gallery loader. Now let's give it text align center, the text align and then center. Let's look at our browser. Nothing has changed, and this is because when we go to the remember that this gallery loader is inside the gallery section, right? The section with class gallery. And when we go to the styling for gallery, we see that it has a display of grid. So let's confirm that this is the reason by commenting out this display grid. Alright, so that's it. If we remove the display grid, this shows up. But the problem with that is that when we go back to our events.js file and bring back the items from the database, you see that they don't have their styling anymore. So what we're going to do is, when we remove the display grid from the gallery.css file, we're actually going to put it back in the events.js file. So right where we're adding the gallery items to the gallery section in HTML, let's edit the gallery section class. So gallery section.style.display, and this is equal to grid. So we're adding it back here. Gallery section.style.display equal to grid. Let's try again. Now we see our loader, and while we're waiting for the images to load, amazing, we can see the images. All right, this is amazing, amazing work. We've come a really long way, and we've done really awesome so far. Let's go back to the conclusion and then where to go from here. Hey, welcome back. We've done a really great job. I mean, look at what we've built. We built our own personal Instagram, and we can edit bio, add a name, Jane Butters, and description, hey, I'm awesome. Submit, and amazing, look at that, Jane Butters, hey, I'm awesome. And we have a profile picture. We have the gallery for our Instagram application. The images are our own images from our own computer, and we can add more images by clicking on this plus icon and then select an image to add. Entry added to gallery. We reload our page. Now we can see the new image. And while our application is fetching the images, notice that we have a loading icon that tells us, hey, I'm doing something. You know, this is really amazing so far. But we're done with the course, but not done with the application yet. That's because you're going to do really extra awesome stuff with this application. So first of all, you can see what we're doing with the images. When we add a new image, we have to reload our page before we can see the new image. I want you to do something like what we did with the edit bio form, so that once we change the name to something else, Jane, and hey, I'm Jane, submit, you see that it reflects immediately. So when we add a new image to the application, to the database, we want to see the image immediately without having or without needing to reload. And this application is looking good so far, but look at our edit bio form. I'm sure you can make it look even better. So do that. And also, I want you to add a delete functionality for the images, so that when I hover on the image, I can see an X button, and when I click that X button, the image will be deleted from the application and from the database immediately. You know the way Instagram works, where when you're uploading an image, you can add a description to it, so that when you click on the image, you see that description for the image, right? Do you think you can attempt that? Oh, would that be too much for you? I'm sure you can. Add a description to the images so that when we add an image to the database, we also add in the description for that image in the database. And when we fetch the image from the database, we'll fetch the description along with it, so that maybe when we click on the image, we can see a modal pop-up, that will give us the description for the image. Or when we hover on the image, we can see the description for the image on it. I'd really love you to attempt that. But if that's too difficult for you, then you can just leave it out. And when you're done, host the application via GitHub pages or on any other hosting platform. I have a very explanatory video on hosting web applications with GitHub pages in my YouTube channel. I'll also leave the link to that in the description. And finally, share your awesome work with me. Share it on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can mention me and I'll see the amazing work that you did. I'm beginning to miss you already, but do well to follow me on Twitter, GitHub importantly, and subscribe to my YouTube channel most importantly. It's been a great experience for me teaching you, and I'm glad you took this course. Bye.